Welcome. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025, Thanksgiving Day. And it is predicted that the news of this will be first reported on November 28th, 2025, Black Friday. The post date on the social media platform that you are watching this video on proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. The next 18 minutes of this video is an introduction that I am placing at the beginning of about a dozen videos. This introduction regards the prophetic signs that occurred on October 30th and 31st, 2025. If you have already watched this introduction in another video, you can skip ahead no more than 18 minutes from this point of the video. All right, it is predicted that famous singer Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will slip and fall and severely injure his head on November 27th, 2025, Thanksgiving Day, and it is predicted that the first news of this fall will be reported on November 28th, the following day, Black Friday. This email was composed, as we can see here, on November 15th, prior to these predictions for November 27th and 28th. Prior to October 30th, and October 31st, 2025. It was predicted that Paul Simon would slip and fall and injure his head on October 30th, and it was predicted that the news of this would first be reported on October 31st. God orchestrated a myriad of connections from other prophetic signs in order to confirm this analysis for October 30th and 31st. In other words, these connections from the other prophetic signs were known in advance of October 30th and 31st to be pointing to October 30th and 31st. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted that Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. First of all, God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and the most important number in God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, which is only being explained on this channel, is the number 9, as from the Bible, the number 9 symbolizes God's judgment. What do I mean by step in the trail of signs? Well, God's prophetic signs, none of them can be properly or fully understood without their context and connections to the other prophetic signs, something that is mostly missed by other people that are interested in God's signs. And this is also why the vast majority of God's signs are completely unknown and missed and are only being talked about on this channel. The reason why God does this is he is able to tell stories through the big picture of signs and interconnected signs that he wouldn't otherwise be able to tell from one single prophetic sign isolated on its own. That's why these signs are not recognized in general by other so-called watchers, and the signs that are recognized are not fully appreciated or understood. The reason why God tells these stories is in order to communicate extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know, that is only being communicated or explained, I should say, on this channel. And for example, there was a tremendous theme that God was using for October 30th and 31st, Halloween, that God didn't, I assume, I can gather, want to use for the final date of Paul Simon's fall and then death. These signs and this theme of Halloween are extremely important, and you will see what I'm talking about when you watch these other videos, including probably this video, because what I'm doing right now is making an introduction to these other videos that predicted October 30th and 31st. In other words, there are about 10 other videos that must be watched, every minute of them. And when the prediction comes to pass, the wise person will recognize that they do need to watch every minute of every video on this channel. When the prediction comes to pass that Paul Simon will fall and hit his head and injure his head on November 27th, and it being reported on November 28th, it will prove all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days ahead of the predicted fall. And the reason why that's important is because this will prove all of the information in these other 10 videos that God was telling through these stories that he designed to lead up to October 30th and 31st. He didn't do this for any reason at all. He did this for extremely important reasons. And so that's the purpose of a step in the trail of signs. It further paints the picture and enables God to tell these stories. And these stories could not be possibly told without these steps that served to connect the other prophetic signs in the big picture web of God's signs. Believe me, I know far better than anyone the purpose for this prediction that is from God. And it is to prove the things that I am saying in these videos, and especially the controversial things that I am saying, which will be proven to be true because they are proven beyond a doubt through God's big picture of signs, which in turn will be proven to be true when this prediction comes to pass. And so hopefully I have made it clear why God did this for October 30th and 31st. In other words, what I'm about to explain in the next couple of minutes is an explanation for the prophetic signs that occurred on October 31st and 30th, and which are these dates that we expected such signs in advance of these dates. And when the prediction comes to pass on November 27th, it will prove that October 30th and 31st were indeed steps in the trail of signs. And therefore, all of the analysis for October 30th and 31st that was explained in advance of these dates is 100% correct. To not appreciate this is to miss entirely the point of this prediction that is from God, the point of this video, and the point of the videos on this channel. You might as well turn this video off. If you do not appreciate this, you are wasting your time. Okay, so that's what's going on here. So that's, again, why it is that this video must be watched, and the rest of this video will talk about how God pointed to October 30th and 31st ahead of time, and now you understand why he did this and why it is important that you learn what God did to point to these dates ahead of time. Because what God did to point to these dates ahead of time are the stories that contain the knowledge that you need to know. On October 30th and 31st, we received clear prophetic signs that are related to Paul Simon, as we expected in advance of these dates. October 30th and 31st was a step in the trail of signs that is leading to the date it is predicted Paul Simon will slip and fall and injure his head, which is predicted to be on November 27th, 9 plus 9 plus 9 days after October 31st. Elvis Presley famously covered Simon's Bridge Over Troubled Water song, and Presley died from the effects of his fall in his mansion when he hit his head on a porcelain bathtub. Most people don't know this, but professionals believe that the true reason for Elvis Presley's death was not him taking drugs, but the drugs were taken to deal with the side effects from the severe head injury he had 10 years earlier in 1967, when he fell in his bathroom and hit his head on his porcelain bathtub and was unconscious for an unknown period of time. This, in turn, caused over the years increasingly severe autoimmune diseases as a result of the brain injury. And that's all related to, guess you know what? The Thing, and we will talk about that in these videos. The thing that causes autoimmune diseases. Now, Paul Simon's best-selling album is titled Graceland. His song Graceland is about his journey with his young son to visit the King of Rock, Elvis Presley, the King of Rock and Roll's mansion, Graceland Mansion, in the 4x4th state. Memphis, Tennessee is named after Memphis, Egypt, and Memphis, Tennessee is located in the area of the country that is nicknamed Little Egypt. Elvis Presley, incidentally, has a hit song named Little Egypt from his 9th soundtrack album, no less. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic, and I say that because of the 4x4th state and the number 9, and I'm getting ahead of myself here because God pairs 9 and 44 together. So hold on a second. The King of Rock's Graceland Mansion in Memphis is symbolic of the King of Egypt's palace. And in the Bible, the King of Egypt is a type for the Antichrist king. The Antichrist king, who will reside in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms, and God repeats a number 3 times for emphasis of its symbolic meaning, and is located at 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. This Antichrist king is the 44th president, and he was inaugurated in the year 09. This is why in his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections, God pairs the numbers 9 and 44 together. On October 30th, King Charles, and by the way, in the Bible, the Israelites escaped the persecution from the King of Egypt, and likewise the Pilgrims escaped the persecution from the King of England, which is King Charles. On October 30th, King Charles formally stripped, and Paul Simon sang about the Pilgrims in his song American Tune. On October 30th, King Charles formally, this date that we knew in advance, to relate to Paul Simon, who God is using to point to the King of Rock and Roll. Okay, so on October 30th, King Charles formally stripped Prince Andrew of his royal titles. One of the main stories on October 31st, the following day, was the question of what would become of Prince Andrew's mansion. And also on this day, news broke that Prince Andrew had hired 40 prostitutes in 4 days while he was in the royal kingdom of Thailand. 40 prostitutes in 4 days hints at the number 44. In his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 to confirm his signs and connections. And by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 9, 23, and 44. And I know these are the numbers because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. Okay, and so the reason for 23 and 44 is because the 44th president was the basketball president who wore jersey number 23 in high school basketball. And also the thing alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, the mark of the Antichrist. The 44th president is the Antichrist. So in his signs, God pairs the numbers 23 and 44 together to confirm his signs and connections. The news of Prince Andrew's 40 prostitutes in 4 days in the Royal Kingdom of Thailand was exactly 2 times 300 days after Prince William and Prince Harry visited the King of Rock's Graceland estate and mansion in the 4 times 4th state. And again, the news on this day was Prince Andrew's mansion. And exactly 2,300, or 2 times 300, I should say, days prior, the princes visited the King's Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state. That's a pairing of 23 and 44. Furthermore, it pairs with the 40 prostitutes in 4 days at the other end of this timeline. Okay, now this 2 times 300 days is the equivalent of exactly 4,200 days. And in Bible prophecy, the period of the Antichrist king's rule is symbolized by 42 months. Also, on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet for prophetic signs, trumpeted that he had renovated the Lincoln bathroom in the White House mansion that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. President Lincoln was the 4 times 4th president. Also, on October 31st, Trump had an interview in his mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, Florida, with CBS for the first time since his $4 times $4 million lawsuit with this news company. That's another pairing of 9 and 44. The 9 plus 9 plus 9th state and the $4 times $4 million lawsuit. These signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, again, the 40 prostitutes in 4 days, and the Lincoln bathroom named after the 4 times 4th president in the White House mansion, which has 44 plus 44 rooms and is located at 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, these signs on October 31st that hinted at the number 44, including the sign in Trump's mansion in the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, are 9 plus 9 plus 9 days before Simon is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head in his house or mansion, if you will, on Thanksgiving on November 27th, 2025. The 4 times 4th president formally began the tradition of celebrating Thanksgiving on the 4th Thursday of the month of November. November is Latin for 9. The renovation of the bathroom in the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in his Graceland mansion from the effects of the fall that he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head and ultimately die from his head injury. Okay, I should also add that the Graceland mansion is in the 4 times 4th state. And so the renovation in the bathroom of the White House mansion that is named after the 4 times 4th president hints at how Elvis died in his bathroom in the Graceland mansion in the 4 times 4th state from the effects of the fall he had in his bathroom in his mansion years earlier. Likewise, Simon, who sang about the Graceland mansion, is predicted to slip and fall and injure his head like Elvis did and ultimately die from his head injury. Also on October 31st, Trump, God's trumpet, trumpeted that the U.S. is considering conducting a military raid in support of the persecuted Christians in Nigeria, Africa. Simon's Graceland album was controversial because he visited South Africa during apartheid and he used South African musical influences in his songs on the album. One of the released singles from the album is Under African Skies. This video is documenting the prediction that famous singer-songwriter Paul Simon of Simon and Garfunkel will fall and injure his head on October 31st, 2025. It is also possible that he will die on that day, October 31st, but it is also likely that he will not die immediately and will die at some point later as a result of his head injury that he will incur on the date October 31st, 2025, as predicted. The post date of this video proves that this prediction is being made ahead of time, as does this time-stamped email and forensic notes PDF document. If you are skeptical for some reason, please email me and I will forward these to you. All right, welcome to a video which will be one of the most profound experiences of information you've ever heard of in your life. This video will be talking about many, many things. All right, so the way in which God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works is that it incorporates so much, and through the connections, because none of God's prophetic signs can be properly or fully understood without their connections and context with the other prophetic signs, which is something that many watchers of prophetic signs do not fully appreciate. But because of the connections, it's really tough to put a label and say it's this thing. But this video will be essentially centered around P Diddy, the arguably most famous rapper in history, which is why God is using him for this story that will incorporate so much more than P Diddy. And furthermore, it isn't about P Diddy. It's just symbolism, as you will see. So again, this video isn't about P Diddy. If you're not a P Diddy fan or you're not even familiar with his music, do not worry. It is not about P Diddy. It's symbolism, and it is through the connections involving, some of them anyway, P Diddy, which connect to other things, that God is telling this elaborate, amazing, and extremely important story. And the reason why it's extremely important is because through the story, or stories, God is communicating essential, extremely important information and knowledge that everyone needs to know. It is urgent. Okay? And so one of the patterns that God uses for prophetic signs in general is this concept of a GOAT, the acronym for greatest of all time. So in a way, the most famous rapper, I mean, I'm not a huge rap fan anyway, but I'm sure there are many current, modern, up-to-date rap fans who wouldn't call P. Diddy the greatest rapper. It's an extremely subjective thing, of course. However, if we objectively look at it, P. Diddy is the most famous rapper in history. And that's all that's necessary for the symbolism here, for him being a sort of GOAT, if you will. Now, this is ultimately connecting to this prediction. This is the point of the video. Well, the point of the video is this prediction, so that when the prediction comes to pass, it will prove everything else in this video and in this diagram, which is the prediction that Paul Simon will fall and then die of a head injury on October 31st, 2025. And when this prediction comes to pass, like I said, it'll prove everything that is being explained in this video to be truth from God. And this is the purpose of the prediction and the purpose of this video and video channel. And to make no mistake, I know far better than anyone else the reason and purpose for this prediction. Again, it is to prove the things that'll be explained in this video, and especially the controversial things that I'll be explaining in this video. The controversial things that I'll be explaining in this video will become fact when the prediction comes to pass, and that is the purpose of the prediction. Make no mistake. Okay? Because the purpose of the prediction is not, for example, for the audience to go, oh, cool. You were able to know that Paul Simon would fall and die on October 31st. That's amazing. Neat. Coolio. No, that's not at all the reason and purpose for the prediction. It is to prove the matter of what I am saying in the video. This is the nature of prophecy. The reason why 1/3 of the Bible is prophecy is for God to prove it is the Word of God. And that's what's going on here. Okay? It is the function of this prediction is to prove the matter. All right. So we have here on October 3rd, 2025, which is just 2 days ago, and the reason this video is being made right now, the climax, if you will, the end, the culmination, the ultimate end point, if you will, I think. There could be more P Diddy signs, of course. But the story of P Diddy, I believe, is complete with his sentencing. The story of P Diddy in terms of God's prophetic signs, although arguably began with the beginning of his career, as you will see, began with the indictment of him last March of 2024. This is when it came into focus that P Diddy is a very important prophetic sign in God's big picture of signs. All right? And so it does make sense that the complete picture, at least so it seems, would come on the day of his sentencing. Now, okay, it's going to take a while to explain this diagram, okay? I'm going to go through it slowly and methodically, and I'll do my best to clearly explain what's going on. It's not complicated, and I think that I have an ability to explain things, and so bear with me. After I've done explaining these connections and the things that happened on these dates that were prophetic, and why it all matters and how it's all related and integrated, I will then read, that'll be like the part 1 of this video, if you will, and then part 2, I will read the notes that I wrote to a friend of mine in an email thread that will give so much more color and importance to what I'm explaining. So what I'm explaining, in other words, is necessary. It's necessary, of course, that you watch this part 1 where I explain this diagram, but you will not be able to appreciate it fully until you hear what I have to say about what all of this means in the other part, in which I read what I wrote about all of this. Okay, this is, in other words, just point form. And I'll do a much better job of explaining things also after this is explained, this point form diagram. All right. Now, October 3rd was the day that P Diddy was sentenced to 4 years in jail. Okay, we sentenced to 4 years in jail. That's very important in terms of prophecy, this number 4 here. And it was a total of 50 months, okay? So the headline was 4 years, but if you get into the detail of the story, it's actually 4 years and 2 months, which is also prophetic, as is a total of 50 months. Because for one thing, I'll explain why this matters or why this is the case in a minute, but from the 4-year sentence, which is equivalent to 50 months, it is exactly 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the rapture, Christianity's most preposterous idea, which is that God's faithful will be rescued from the persecution of the Antichrist, and this rapture will be on Pentecost. And Pentecost literally means 50th day, which is why the number 50 is symbolic of not only Pentecost, but the church, because the church age began on the first, or rather the second Pentecost, depending on if you interpret God coming down on the mountain of Sinai on the first Pentecost as being the first Pentecost. Well, anyway, that's another subject. So 50 is why it's connecting with this exact number of 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the 4-year sentence, which is also 50 months. Incidentally, 50 can be broken into 2 times 52, which hints at the number that symbolizes the end times in Bible prophecy, which is 2,520. Okay. Now, well, one reason too, another reason, it's the third of the month. Okay, and so it's because God, this is how God signs are. It jumps around, right? You have to have a big picture to appreciate it all, and I'm going to do my best to go through it in a linear fashion, because that's all you can do. But God's big picture of signs isn't linear. That's why it's very, very difficult to explain. And when you pull one part of the web, you end up pulling the entire web, which is what you have, I guess a slice of the entire web right here. Well, anyway, this 4-year sentence was exactly 4 years after the new green pass in Israel. It was an update to the original green pass, which I'll explain in a second, regarding the thing. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. And the ability to be a part of society and a citizen and the whole world, which is why it's relevant. Not only is Israel prophetically the center of God's world, but in terms of this CVD disease thing, the world was looking at Israel as a test pilot, if you will, a test case for imposing such a thing, this green pass, where you couldn't go into a movie theater or a gym or things like that without this green pass, okay? Now, green is the 4th letter of the rainbow. It is also in Bible prophecy, the 4th horse is also the color of pale green. Okay, and the new green pass was an update because it required, to get the green pass, having taken 3 of the SHOTs, the things, okay? Prior to that, the original green pass required the 2 of the things, taking the 2, right? But then there was the BOOSTER, and so then it was updated to having required a requirement of the 3 SHOTs, the 3, okay? Okay, and so that's why it's the 3rd of the month right here, but also 10 times 3 is 30, which hints at 3 also. And we have this exact 4 years, okay? Now the thing about Paul Simon is that God is using Paul Simon, one reason is to point to Amos chapter 1 with its 15 verses, which is why Paul Simon's new album, 7 Psalms, was inspired by a dream, a prophetic dream in which a voice told Paul Simon to create the album on the date 115. Paul Simon and Garfunkel's first album was Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. Wednesday is the 4th day of the week. 3 a.m. is the beginning of the 4th watch in ancient Israel. So that's a 3 and a 4. Again, three SHOTs, the 3rd of the month, 4 years apart, to the 4-year sentence of P Diddy on the 3rd of the month, okay? 3 and a 4. That's because of the repeating Hebrew idiom in the book of Amos, chapter 1, in its 15 verses. This idiom is repeated. The idiom is for 3 transgressions and for 4. The meaning of this idiom is the tolerable limit of transgressions has been reached, or exceeded, I should say, and now judgment and destruction of the nation or society is unavoidable. For 3 transgressions and for 4. That's why Simon and Garfunkel's first album was the Wednesday morning, 3 a.m. album. Okay, 3 and 4, but also that first album was made after the first agent signed Simon and Garfunkel, Wally Amos, the founder of famous Amos cookies, which hints at the book of Amos. All right, now there's more to that, but that's explained in other videos. The point is just what I just said, is that this 4 years from the 3rd and the 3 SHOTs to P Diddy's 4-year sentence on the 3rd of the month also is a hint for 3 transgressions and for 4. And what is the judgment and destruction? For 3 transgressions and for 4 is an idiom that means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and judgment is now unavoidable. The judgment is the thing, the SHOT, which required 3 of them for the green pass. Again, that hints at the 4th color of the rainbow, and that's why the 4 years connection here. The 4th horse that's green, by the way, is the horse. The rider of that horse is the angel of, the rider of famine and pestilence, and the sword. All right? And the rider was given authority to kill 1/4 of the population of the earth through sword, famine, and pestilence. All right? Now, ultimately, what's going to happen, which is what the Green Pass is a prototype for, is that there's going to be a worldwide famine, a food shortage that will be caused by volcanic ash in the atmosphere that will ruin crops and cause a food shortage. And the good citizens, the so-called good citizens, the ones who take the thing and are able to participate in society like the Green Pass restricted, those who wouldn't take the thing, those who do not take the thing will not be able to buy and sell the rationed food. Okay, so that's what's coming. And the thing is the mark of the Antichrist. And that's, again, the reason for this prediction that is from God is to prove that. It is case closed. There's no debate at all regarding this thing as to whether or not it is the mark of the Antichrist. Okay, and believe me, I know far better than you the reason and purpose for the prediction here, and it is to prove what I have just said. It is the thing, it is the mark of the Antichrist. In its current form, it does not need an additional something to go with it, such as an additional technology or false form of religious worship. In fact, for those who are wise, it did come with a false form of religious worship. And also, it does not need a supposed new age of dispensation after supposedly all quote-unquote Christians will be raptured. In fact, one of the main reasons why the vast majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken the mark of the Antichrist is that it is judgment for this particular doctrine, dispensationalism, which comes in the package of free grace or cheap grace with its cousin Calvinism and Reformed theology and once saved, always saved. All of that is what Jesus called the Nicolaitan doctrine of our day. And Jesus said he is coming to make war with the sword of his mouth on those that teach and have the works that are a product of this doctrine. And the commonly held objections that people have based on their understanding of Bible prophecy regarding why this thing cannot be the mark of the Antichrist are answered in the must-watch snake bite video. But make no mistake, it is the mark of the Antichrist in its current form. And there is nowhere in Bible prophecy that says that one cannot repent after having taken the mark of the Antichrist. And so, yes, the majority of quote-unquote Christians have already taken it, but they can still repent. At least that's the way I read the Bible. And it also makes sense given that these masses of people have taken it without really knowing. But they have. And they should have known. And there's no excuse, actually, for not knowing. I'm not going to be an excuser here. It is what it is. It's very serious. And the reason why there should be no excuse is because it did its function. It separated the sheep from the goats. Those who took the mark of the Antichrist, even if they were a quote-unquote Christian, should have known better, because had they been someone crying out for justice and righteousness, they would have been not following the mainstream and the media and the secular society and the secular left and their religion, which caused them to become cult-like in the CVD era. And they still are, of course, cult-like. Okay? And so you're following the false religion if you are on the left and you are a supposed quote-unquote Christian. In other words, what I am saying is that you are not a quote-unquote Christian if you are on today's left and you participated in what happened. And not only was it not good for yourself, the reason why it was unrighteous is because by taking it, you enabled the Antichrist system to compel other people to take it. Had people resisted, and a majority of people resisted, as it happened in some countries, none of this would have happened. And so you are guilty for forcing other people to take it if you took it. Do you understand? It is like I am saying. You can tell yourself, oh, I had to take it because of my job, or I needed to go on vacations, and it wasn't really me. I'm just following the orders. I'm just following the rules. No, by following the rules, you participated in it, and you are just as guilty. Because you should not have done it. You should not have put on the mask. If you did wear the mask, you are also guilty of making other people do it. You see? Besides that, it's also an abomination for other reasons, including it changes one's chromosomes, and all of these things, not just the CVD one, use in their development cells from unborn babies. Okay? Now, enough of that subject. That's the mark. That's what we got here, the fourth horse, and the color green is for that purpose too, identifying the fourth horse, but it's also the fourth color of the rainbow. Now, why is P Diddy relevant to this? Well, P Diddy essentially was convicted for his parties because he got convicted for sex trafficking, right? But that's part of his lifestyle and who P Diddy was, which was a focus on his so-called freak-out parties. And the things that were taken at P Diddy's freak-out parties are symbolic of taking the mark. They took lots of drugs, and those drugs included things, pointy things, okay, that were put into people's bodies, right? When people do drugs like that, that's one of the methods in which they consume them. But drugs on their own are, in fact, also symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, because it is, in fact, a supposed pharmaceutical product, right? Okay. But there's more. Because what happened on the same day that P. Diddy was sentenced to 4 years was the shooting down of the fourth Venezuelan drug boat. And in it, 4 people were killed. That's the story. That's the headline. 4 people killed. And it was the fourth Venezuelan drug boat. On the day that P. Diddy, who was convicted essentially for his drug parties, was sentenced to 4 years. Okay? Not only that, speaking of Israel, we have this 4-year connection from an Israel sign. Do we have an Israel sign on this day? We certainly do. An extremely important one, and it involves boats. Because on this day, the last, and God uses firsts and lasts for prophetic signs, and this was a first and a last, the last boat in the flotilla of protesters arrived and was intercepted. It caught the Israelis off guard by surprise because this boat wasn't with the other boats. It was delayed due to some issue, I forget. And so it fell way behind. And by the time it had arrived, the Israelis thought all of the boats had arrived, is how the story goes. And so this boat became the first boat in history, or the first boat in the 4 times 4 year blockade of Gaza to come within 70 miles. The boat was captured 42 nautical miles off the coast of Gaza, and it was the 42nd boat. P. Diddy on this day was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months, which hints at 42. The number 42 isn't trivial. It symbolizes the period of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy. Hence this period of time of 4 years and 2 months, which is then second witnessed with the 42nd boat 42 miles off the coast of Gaza, which connects to the Green Pass in Israel. Okay, and by the way, this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works, which is only being explained on this channel. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. All right. So, something that I'll just add here. We've got the 42 nautical miles and 70 miles because it was captured 42 miles off the coast, but the first in the 4 times 4 year blockade that came within 70 miles. 70 plus 42 is 112. P Diddy's by far biggest song, the song that really launched his career, if you will, is the tribute song, I'll Be Missing You, after his friend, another rapper, was shot, as in symbolism for the mark of the Antichrist, because things that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of the things that come out of things and go into people. Okay, so, and the song, I'll Be Missing You, what was I going to say here? It features the R&B group 112. That's why the 17 miles and 42 miles connected to P Diddy. The reason why the song became so popular is that it used a sample, a very catchy sample, from the song from the Police, Every Breath You Take, which was #1 on the chart for 4 plus 4 weeks. And yeah. And P Diddy's song, I'll Be Missing You, won the rap song of the year at the 40th Grammy Awards. And I'm going all from memory here. There'll be more, like I said, in part 2 of this explanation of this in this video. Well, I'll go into some truly profound details like this and many other profound things and summaries. All right. Now, let's see. Okay, so we are now, okay, speaking of boats, so we have 2 boat signs here, right? And by the way, we have water and green right here, connected to Israel and green, water, boats. We have this sign, which I'll get to in a second, which was when the canals in Venice turned green. And Venice rhymes with Venezuela, and the big witness in P Diddy's trial, his ex-girlfriend, who he beat on camera, Cassandra Ventura. Okay, there's a reason for all of the Vens in a second, I'll explain. But I wanted to just say, you know, we have, and this connects to the Green Pass here, so we have the water and Israel and the boats, but P Diddy is relevant to the boats as well, because back here on this day, his son, let's see, on April 5th, 2024, there was a lawsuit filed against his son, Christian Combs, because his real name is Sean Combs. His son, Christian Combs, had a lawsuit filed against him by this woman named Grace O'Marcaigh. I don't know how you pronounce it. That's an Irish name. But the O'Marcaigh hints at Mark, the mark of the Antichrist. And of course, the purpose of the mark of the Antichrist and the purpose of the Antichrist and the purpose of the end times is to test the faith of quote-unquote Christians who haven't at this point demonstrated their faith, which is required. Because God deemed Abraham righteous after he believed in his promise, God's promise, but there's a second part, not coincidentally, I don't think, illustrated in Genesis chapter 22, which is that God called upon Abraham to demonstrate his faith when he called upon him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And as he was about to do so, God sent the angel to speak for God and said to Abraham, "Stop, for now I know that you fear me." Because, contrary to what Calvinists and others believe, God does not know everything. If he did, there wouldn't be free will, and that's how we are in the image of God. And God did not know, as it clearly says in the text, not only at that place, but in many other places in the Bible, he did not know ahead of time whether or not Abraham feared him. And God is looking for those who fear him. And to fear him, it needs to be demonstrated. It's a form of faith. It's a test of faith. It's a actualization of one's faith. Furthermore, Abraham really didn't know ahead of time either, until he was in that situation. And if you read correctly the book of Revelation and the letters to the churches, contrary to what the Reformed theologists say, which contradicts what James said when he said, and used Abraham as an example, "For you see, a person is not saved by faith alone, but through works." The only place the phrase "saved by faith alone" appears in the Bible is this passage, when James said one is not saved by faith alone, because faith without works is dead. And he used the examples of Rahab and Abraham, who were deemed righteous for believing at first, but then were called to demonstrate their faith. And so, demonstrating one's faith, a leap of faith, if you will, in trust in God's promises, typically involves some form of sacrifice and or risk. And you could argue that a majority of quote-unquote Christians have not been or put themselves in a situation which they should have done already, but have not done so, where they were required to sacrifice and demonstrate their faith through some kind of sacrifice or risk that really put a lot on the line, like serious sacrifice and risk. And so that's the purpose of the end times and being faced with starvation or taking the mark, which is what's coming, right? The warm-up, which was still the mark, was, not being able to go to the gym or the movie theater, like with the Green Pass, right? And so, the really weak ones fell away here, but there'll be others that didn't take the mark yet, but will once they're faced with starvation. Okay, and so, yes, this is what it's all about, right? Okay, so that's why because God is using P Diddy for all of this, that's why his son's name is Christian, because it hints at Christians. Now, that's also why the plaintiff is Grace, and her name is Mark, because that's what's coming for Christians, because that's the purpose of the mark. It's for quote-unquote Christians, to call upon them to demonstrate their faith, to compel them to finally actualize their faith, to finally not follow the politics of the left. In the case of Catholics, to finally come out of the wickedness of Catholicism and following the Pope, because the Pope is the first of the two antichrists, for a good reason. It's exactly what I'm saying. The purpose of the Antichrist is to test the faith, and that's because many Catholics are Christians. I'm not saying they aren't. But if they do end up being saved, and no one is saved past tense, if many people are on the path to being saved, But if anyone will be saved that is Catholic, it will be in spite of their Catholicism and not because of it. And that goes with the other denominations as well that are also heretical and man-made religion on top of the Bible, which is what Catholicism is. It's not the Bible. It's a mixture of the Bible and man-made religion, which God hates. The thing that God hates the most is false religion, and the Jews in ancient Israel were constantly being chastised for mixing the true religion with the false pagan religions around them, which is exactly what Catholicism is, as is the Church of Latter-day Saints, etc. And the Seventh-day Adventists. Now, so again, back to this. So that's the boat. So the thing is that Christians being sued due to an incident that occurred on a boat. Okay, the news broke about this on this April 5th date, but in the article, it's in the plaintiff, in the lawsuit, it says that Christian Combs was asked by Grace, "Are you drugging me?" And Christian replied, "Take the SHOT." Which in this case referred to a shot glass of alcohol, but that's also symbolism for the mark, the thing that goes into people, just like alcohol does, just like bullets that come out of guns do. That kind of SHOT is also symbolism, but so is taking a shot of whiskey or whatever she was given, which had drugs in it. Okay, so she was drugged and she's filing the lawsuit. Utter unrighteous behavior by this so-called man, Christian Combs, assuming that he's guilty. But given the track record of his father, we have good reason to suspect that he probably is. And so, this day is 911 days to the sentencing of P Diddy. See how it works here? 911 days. The reason for that is because not only is this prophetic in general, because of the warning on 9/11 in 2001, but also Revelation 9/11, which symbolizes the first part of the chapter, which describes how those who will take the mark will become demonically possessed. That day is coming. The end times is, if you will, a collision between the demonic realm and the earthly realm. And the thing about those who take the mark is that at some point in the near future, the demons that will break out of the bottomless pit, as described in the Revelation chapter 9 and 9/11, which is symbolic of the whole passage, will then demonically possess people, who will also wish to die and won't be able to, which is why it'll be a zombie pandemic, if you will, which is why God is using zombie movies for all of this. But anyway, that's a whole other story. So anyway, you get the idea here. It's Christian Combs. It's because of the mark, Grace will mark. Okay, and Christian told her to take the shot. Okay. Now the thing is also on this same day, P Diddy, Christian's father, posted on social media his victory video. Now, this is a whole other subject which I covered last year in 2024, and it's been a while since I refreshed my memory on all of the content, but this video is pointing to the movie Apocalypse Now. It's an apocalyptic video. P Diddy is the main guy in the video, and it's like a cross between Apocalypse Now or it's not really a cross. It's just apocalyptic, but it involves Dennis Hopper, one of the stars of the movie Apocalypse Now. Dennis Hopper plays this authoritarian dictator guy, symbolic of the Antichrist, and so that's why the connection to Apocalypse Now, because it's an apocalyptic scene, but it's more like Running Man. P Diddy is the guy on the run, and the police state is after him. Okay, and anyway, it's symbolic of Apocalypse Now, and that's why all of this connected back then to here, the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now. And Apocalypse Now, famously or infamously, cost $45 million to make. I mean, that's a huge part of the story of the movie Apocalypse Now. The movie Apocalypse Now is about the making of it, and that's why Francis Ford Coppola's wife, Eleanor Coppola, won awards. I think it was an Oscar award for her documentary about the making of the movie Apocalypse Now. But the biggest thing about the making of the movie Apocalypse Now was the budget and how it went way over budget. And it was during this time in which directors in the 70s were given carte blanche to just write checks for whatever amount they wanted from the studios because they were so successful, this new generation of baby boomer directors with making their movies, that they just let them do what they wanted. And that began to be criticized in the early 80s around and part of that beginning of the criticism was the movie, which was released in 79, Apocalypse Now. So there's all this backstory to the significance of the amount that it cost, but it cost $45 million, all right? And that's why the 45th anniversary of this movie is so important, which was this date here, August 15th, 2024, which was shortly after all of these other P Diddy signs when his mansions first started getting raided, or were raided, I should say, and we have the boat sign on his son and him posting the victory video, which was a hint at, through God, prophetically, to the movie Apocalypse Now. And that's why it was astounding to learn when, or the date, that P. Diddy posted the social media post about his video victory, which was the date 4/5, April 5th, which hinted at the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now. And this date, this 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now, was recognized months before, including around this time it was known in early April. And that's why, the jaw dropped when it was found that the P. Diddy post about victory, because I already knew that it was pointing to Apocalypse Now. In fact, okay, so after the raid of the mansions, which was March 24th or 25th, I looked into P. Diddy and realized that the victory video was about Apocalypse Now. And then after that, P. Diddy posted Apocalypse Now, his victory video, which is like in itself a hint at a movie, because it posted it on the date 4/5. And I already knew beforehand that God was pointing to Apocalypse Now and the 45th anniversary of it. And I already knew that P. Diddy was about Apocalypse Now. And then this happened. P. Diddy posted his victory video that pointed to Apocalypse Now on the date 4/5. So it was astounding beyond words at the time that happened. By the way, it wasn't only the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now, it was the 79th anniversary of the end of World War II in 1945. 79 is the 22nd prime number. The inverse of the number 45 is 0.022, as in 22. The number 22 is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. I say this over and over in every video, but let me explain it again. The reason is because the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist that is described in the book of Ezekiel would have been a Tav mark. The Tav letter in the Hebrew alphabet is the last and 22nd letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the last and 22nd book of the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. The last book in the Bible is the 22nd out of 22 books in the Bible that have a total of 22 chapters. And also, the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes, and chromosomes come in pairs, and each of the arms of the pair come in 2 arms. So a chromosome is made of 2 arms, and they come in pairs, which gives us 2 and 2. And the mark of the Antichrist changes a person's chromosomes. That's why the 45th anniversary is because it hints at 0.022. And that's why we also have the 79th anniversary of the end of World War II in 45. because 79 is the 22nd prime number, and 45 is hinting at 0.22 or 0.022. So you see, but what also happened on this day confirms all of this. Now I've jumped to this day, so let's just continue now with this day, might as well. On this day, we had green, the color, the fourth color in the rainbow, fourth horse, which is about pestilence and famine. And the mark of the Antichrist will be enforced through the famine, like I explained. Okay, now, on this day, the band Green Day sped up the final, as in last, as in the end times, performance of the last song of the concert in St. Louis due to lightning. Jesus said he saw Satan falling like lightning. The name Barak in Hebrew means lightning. The reason for St. Louis, because Barak is the second of the two antichrists. The reason for St. Louis is because of the gateway arch, which is symbolic of a portal and a door to the bottomless pit and the demonic realm through which the demons will emerge, as is symbolized by Revelation 9:11, and the demonically possessed people who take the mark. The mark of the Antichrist is described in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, and that's why from this day it is 13 months and 18 days to this P Diddy sign, which he was sentenced for drug parties, which involved things, as you know, as I explained, in the drug boat and all of this, okay? Okay, now, also, a door, the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet, is symbolic of a door. And it is through the door that the key opens in the book of Revelation, chapter 9, that the demons emerge from the bottomless pit, okay? So that's why a portal and a door, but also that's why 4 years. The 4-year sentence is because this number in God's big picture of signs symbolizes a door. In other words, the portal to the demonic realm, which is why the connection to St. Louis here with Green Day. Now, the song that they sped up, and it was only that one last song, is their song, Good Riddance. I hope you have the time of your life. That's God speaking. You choose the mark, you choose Satan, you choose sin, you choose this world. Good riddance. I hope you have the time of your life. You've chosen unrighteousness over righteousness. You do not belong to God. And that's the point of this life. It is to make this choice. And no one is righteous enough for God, which is why one needs to be forgiven and needs to receive God's grace and mercy, which comes through Jesus, who conquered death, which is what Satan's power is over us, because the wages of sin is death. Heaven wouldn't be heaven if we were to be in it as we are now. That's the reason for death. You get a lifetime, an opportunity to choose, to make the choice as to whether you are interested in God or not, and interested enough to follow his ways or not, and go your own way. The separation of the sheep from the goats. That's the purpose of this life that we are in which there is righteousness and unrighteousness, in order for us to contrast the two and have the experience in order to decide for ourselves which we prefer. Anyway, good riddance. I hope you have the time of your life. Now, on this same day, we had the ketamine queen sign. It was the arrest or the indictment of the ketamine queen, the woman who led the drug ring that supplied Matthew Perry, the famous actor, with the things. Because he used things to put the ketamine inside him, which was symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. All right? And it was a queen, which is symbolic of the king, the Antichrist king. Now, on this same day, because this pointed to Matthew Perry, well, not only that, but Matthew Perry was a part of the story, obviously, because she was arrested because of her supplying Matthew Perry. We had the hit and run, which is also symbolic of taking a SHOT, of Perry Kurtz, a comedian famous in Los Angeles at I forget the name of the club, the famous comedian club. But the hit and run of Perry Kurtz, and it was right near where Matthew Perry lived and was supplied the things from the ketamine queen. Perry Kurtz died from the hit and run, and this hinted at Colonel Kurtz, the antagonist in the movie Apocalypse Now, the big villain, the evil dictator guy who was symbolic of the Antichrist in the movie Apocalypse Now. It's amazing. Perry Kurtz hinted at Colonel Kurtz. Now, the thing is, Perry is a type of apple. It hints at pears. And the most common strain of pears is the Bartlett pear. That's why on this same day, President Bartlett, in the big famous show West Wing, which hints at the Antichrist, who will reside in the West Wing, the White House, the president, the second of the two Antichrists, Barack Obama, President Bartlett, in other words, Martin Sheen, who played President Bartlett in the West Wing show, shook hands with the president. Okay? Joe Biden. On this day. Okay? That's amazing. And again, this was known for months ahead of time that God was pointing to this date because it was the 45th anniversary of the release of the movie Apocalypse Now that cost $45 million. This was known months ahead of time, and here we are getting, as expected, these Apocalypse Now signs. The hit and run of Perry Kurtz, as in Colonel Kurtz, and also the other protagonist, Martin Sheen, who played President Bartlett, which is why Perry Kurtz, as in pears, Bartlett pears. Now, it gets even more amazing because we have a documentary of the Apocalypse Now sign in here, and that's what it's really all about. As I said earlier, it's about the making of the movie as well. And that documentary, like I said, was made by the wife of Coppola, Eleanor Coppola, which is why Perry Kurtz got his career started when he won a competition in his local town. I think it was in Georgia, where he impersonated Jerry Lewis, as in St. Louis, and sang the song Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles. If you don't know the song, it's the song that goes, "Ah, look at all the lonely people," which is in itself a reference to the coming divisiveness and loneliness in society that's the cause of the mark of the Antichrist. I jumped ahead. It will cause loneliness, but it's at its root, the cult of the left, the CVD cult that happened in 2020 and 21 and 22, as explained by the professor of Ghent University in Belgium, was what he calls a mass formation. You could also call it a mass psychosis, although he prefers not to use that. But the root of that is the epidemic of loneliness in society. And especially on the left, the secular left that has no meaning in life because they have rejected the evidence for God or have decided they are not interested in learning the evidence for the God of the Bible, the God of Israel, even though it's amazing and it's overwhelming and clear and everything, but they're simply not interested because they do not want there to be a God. For them, that is icky. They find that uncomfortable. It's not for them to pray in the morning to a God. They cannot fathom themselves do it. They are not interested in God. The evidence is right there if they want and are interested in it, but they refuse it. And they refuse to listen to those who tell them about it. They will not listen. It's all spiritual. They have rejected God and Jesus. And in doing so, they have aligned themselves with Satan. They do not know it, but they are, most of them, a lot of them do, but a lot of them don't know it. They are children of Satan. Everyone is, until they are rescued and saved by Jesus. And they have chosen to reject Jesus, and so they will pay the price. First, they will take the mark of the Antichrist. They will become demonically possessed. And that's just the beginning of the hell that's coming for them. Because they did not have any interest in God, but God is a good God, and sin must be paid for. If there were no consequences, no justice for sin, there would not be a just and righteous God. So they will pay the price for their sin in hell. And of course, it's all commensurate with what they did in their life. Not every person is going to the same place in hell. But they will go to a bad place. No matter who they are, if they're going to hell, it's not a good place. And they will be tortured in many cases until they have paid the price, and then they will die the second death. Contrary to what many confused quote-unquote Christians will tell people, that people will be tortured forever in hell. Well, of course not. And the person that stumbles on the truth about God based on that, it's understandable, but it's not forgivable. You should look into the other evidence and not obviously base your decision about God based on what someone told you about what happens to people after death. Because if you didn't look into the evidence and you weren't convicted in your spirit of your sin, that's your own fault, not the fault of someone who told you that people will be tortured forever in hell. Because of course, that isn't a righteous God, and you have every good reason to believe that God doesn't exist. Because that God doesn't exist. People will not be tortured forever in hell. But they will, as the Bible says, die a second death after they've paid the price for their sin. That's one group. There's three groups. Contrary to what these Christians will tell you, there's only two groups. There's three groups of people. The second group is the group that will receive a second chance in hell. Jesus will be visiting people in hell, or Sheol, as it's called in the Bible, and many will be rescued out of hell. These will be people that did not have a good opportunity to learn about Christ in their lifetime, including, for example, those that were born before Christ, but still, sinned, right? Because as Paul says, the law is written on people's hearts. One does not even need the Bible to know the difference between right and wrong, but that knowledge becomes corrupted with culture over time, what they're born into, etc. But anyway, there is a second group, and many people, for example, in a country like Thailand, where the majority of people have no idea about what Christ is, or who Christ is, and the Bible, and the God of Israel, they will be given a second chance. Okay, obviously they will be. Obviously, if you think about it, logically that would be the case. But the Bible has passages that support this. And then there are the first group of people who will pass from life to life. They will not go to Sheol at all. They will go to the kingdom. These are those who have accepted Christ as their Savior and followed Christ faithfully and trusted, and as I mentioned, lived a life in which they demonstrated their faith. Because faith is a doing, not an intellectual agreement with a particular doctrine, contrary to what the Calvinists think. Which is silly, because if they were correct, then heaven is going to be filled with a bunch of white men, older white men, that understood the Calvinist doctrine. Of course, that's ridiculous. One does not get to heaven based on their intellectual understanding of doctrine. Faith is a doing. It involves trust, which, as I explained earlier, involves actualizing through actions their faith. Okay. So, now why did God do all of this? To point to this documentary that won awards, and I forget, there's more details to this prophetic sign, which I'm forgetting, but it won awards and stuff like that It's called Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse. Because the movie Apocalypse Now is based on the novel or Hearts of Darkness. So the documentary is called Hearts of Darkness, a filmmaker's apocalypse. Okay? And anyway, the people who take the mark and reject Jesus do have hearts of darkness. But the big thing about the movie is the revelation that Martin Sheen, in the making of the movie, actually cut his hand. There is the famous scene in which he's waiting out time, holed up, if you will, not trapped, but just hiding out in a hotel room. And he goes a little stir crazy. He doesn't go a little. He goes stir crazy, and I think drinks alcohol and gets angry. And at one part of the movie, one part of the scene, I should say, he punches the mirror with his fist. And he's improvising, right? He's just going with it. From what I remember, it wasn't even scripted that he punched the mirror, but he punched himself in the mirror as he was going with it, and he was acting, and he continued to go with it even though he had just cut his hand really badly. So he's bleeding badly, and he continued to just go with it. And so you got blood all over the room and on the bed sheets, and he's crazy, so he's doing crazy things by spreading the blood around and stuff. Anyway, it's a bloody hand. One takes the mark, and the thing is put into a person's blood. And Bible prophecy speaks of the right hand in terms of taking the mark. Okay, the Bible prophecy says the people who take the mark will take it with their right hand or their forehead. But they'll take it in the right hand or with the right hand or the forehead, okay? It says that they will be marked on their right hand or forehead. Now, it does not mean that that it will be an actual mark, a physical mark on their right hand or the forehead. First of all, this is one of the, by the way, this is one of the passages that people who claim that the CVD thing, was not the mark of the Antichrist, because there was no mark on the right hand or the forehead. Well, let's look at this. It's not difficult to understand that that's not correct, because first of all, it's a right hand or a forehead. So, are we to expect that in some jurisdictions, some countries, you will have the choice? You can take it either on the right hand or the forehead? Or there'll be some countries or states or whatever where you can take, it will be on the right hand, and in other states or countries it'll be on the forehead? Because it says the right hand or the forehead. But why is it the right hand? Why can't it be the left hand? What if you're left-handed, for example? Well, the reason why it's the right hand is because it's symbolic. A right hand is symbolism for actions, and the forehead is symbolism for one's thoughts. And that's exactly the case in the Old Testament, in the book of Leviticus. It talks about the right hand and the forehead being symbolic, and it says in the text that it's symbolic of one's actions and deeds. Thoughts and deeds. And so taking the mark of the Antichrist in the right hand or the forehead is taking it in terms of one's thoughts and deeds. Right? And taking it is a bad deed, as I explained. It's an abomination, and like I explained, taking it participates in the system, the Antichrist system, which compels other people to take it, which is one very good, big reason why it's unrighteous. It's not only unrighteous because you're changing your own chromosomes. And that's how you're marked, by the way. You're marked because it inserts snake chromosomes into a person's chromosomes. Snake venom, I should say. Because that's what the protruding amino acid chain is. And you know what I'm talking about. Think about it. I can't say the word. The protruding amino acid chain that is characteristic of the CVD disease and therefore also characteristic of the thing that was used as well, right? All that gets inserted, and what that is, in truth, it is snake venom, which incidentally is why all of the symptoms of those who had the CVD disease and the long CVD are the same exact symptoms of someone who has received a snake bite. That's why the doctors were confused extremely with the unusual symptoms of this supposed respiratory disease, but it wasn't. It was the things that was done to a person's blood, etc., which was characteristic of a snake bite, poisonous snake. Anyway, getting off topic here, but this is the reason why President Bartlett, Martin Sheen, who played the character who cut his hand and got it bloodied all over the room in the movie, shook hands with the president. The President Bartlett shook hands with the president, which had us focus on Martin Sheen's hand. And Martin Sheen's hand, his right hand, punched the mirror and it was real, which was revealed in the Eleanor Coppola Hearts of Darkness documentary. And that's all because it points to the mark, which gives a person blood disease, and it points to prophecy about the hand being marked. Do you see? And this is on the day of the ketamine queen arrests and all this, the green day, green horse, in other words, pestilence, famine. Wow. So this was a big, big day, and it was known that it would be months ahead of time. The 79th anniversary of the end of World War II in 45. The inverse of it is 0.022. Okay, because that number 22 symbolizes the mark. And the astounding thing is, the mark is symbolized by Revelation 13:18, which is why this date, which is all about this profound stuff about the mark, is 13 months and 18 days before P Diddy's sentencing. And P Diddy is all about Apocalypse Now because of his victory video starring Dennis Hopper and his post on the date 4/5, as in the 45th anniversary of the Apocalypse Now movie that cost $45 million to make. What's astounding here is that on this day that P Diddy was sentenced, it was the last boat of 450 Gaza protesters in the flotilla. And on this same day, Israel announced that deportation procedures had begun for the 450 protesters. Obviously, 450 hints at 45. Also, we have another big 45 here. P. Diddy was sentenced to 4 years, but it was a 50-month sentence. And again, P. Diddy posted his victory video on the date 4/5, which was amazing because prior to this even, it was recognized that P. Diddy's video was pointing to Apocalypse Now and the 45th anniversary of this movie that cost $45 million. So you have the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now that all points to the mark, connected with this number of time that hints at Revelation 13, which is about the mark, to the number 45 here, with the 450 protesters outside of Gaza, which is symbolic of hell and demons, because the Hamas that broke through the wall on October 7th, 2023 is symbolic of the demons that will break out of the bottomless pit of hell and come to demonically possess people. And that's what the Hamas warriors were, demonically possessed. Of course, if you know the atrocities they committed, and most people don't know because that hasn't been, because the footage of the video of that is too horrific for the regular public to see. But these weren't soldiers. These were demons that emerged from hell, symbolized by Gaza. Okay? And Hamas. Now, but also 450 is extremely relevant because Elijah in the Bible defeated the 450 false prophets of the god Baal, which is another term for Satan. Because the ancients who worshipped the god Baal were in fact worshipping Satan, which is why they were sacrificing their babies on the fire of the altar of the god. And the big story in the Bible regarding Elijah is his defeat of these 450 false prophets of Baal. And after Elijah, God anointed King Jehu, which is symbolized by Trump, the 45th president. And that's another story. But anyway. Oh, by the way, Jehu, this just came to me right now, his reign lasted for 28 years, and he was the 45th, he defeated the 400, Trump is Jehu is a type for Trump, or the other way around, whatever you want to look at it, and Trump is the 45th president. And that's why, from the 450 protesters and supporters of Baal, if you will, we have 28 days to the predicted date of the death of Paul Simon. Now, Paul Simon is predicted to die in Texas, where he lives, which is the 28th state. And there's reasons for 28, which I'll explain in a second here. Why don't we get into this? Well, no, we have to continue this first. So this sign right here, this date for signs, August 15th, 2024, the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now, the 79th anniversary of the end of World War II. Anyway, this day, and World War II is irrelevant too because the reign of the Antichrist will be during a period of civil war, which of course we are already in. And of course also Bible prophecy says that the Antichrist doesn't create the Antichrist system. He just arrives on the scene and is handed to him the Antichrist system. It's already in place. And the groundwork is being laid down right now. Anyway, that's another subject as well. So the signs right here were 444 days, and it involved Green Day and St. Louis, which is symbolic of door. And again, the number 4 symbolizes door. Green is the 4th color of the rainbow. And the fourth horse's color is green, which is why we have 444 days after the Venice canals turned green. The canals turning green is symbolic of the blood arteries of someone who has taken the mark of the Antichrist, which get clogged and diseased. But that's where the action happens with the mark of the Antichrist. It takes place inside a person's bloodstream and gets spread around the entire body, which, by the way, things aren't supposed to do. But the studies showed clearly that this is what was happening with the CVD disease thing. And even though that information was coming out, the cult of the left, the political religious cult of the left, blocked that information out because they are with Satan. All right. Well, this day in turn, and again, green is the 4th color, which confirms the 444 days to the other Green Day sign, right? Now, this day was the 144th prime number of days, And this is an important number in the book of Revelation that symbolizes those who will be rescued from the mark, which is what was symbolized on this day. This was the day of the implementation of Israel's Green Pass, the first one, before it was updated, which required 3 SHOTs instead of 2. So the Green Pass, which was the prototype for what's coming, Israel was like the nation to do it during the CVD disease, whereas some cities around the US started doing similar things, but not like Israel. The world was watching Israel, as it always does, because it's the center of the world, God's world. It's his land. Anyway, the Green Pass was implemented on this day, and it's the mark that the Green Pass enforced, and people will be rescued in the rapture from the mark and the persecution from the Antichrist, and this is symbolized by the number 144, and that's why we have the 144th prime number of days to the day that the Venice canals turned green. Now, speaking of 450 prophets of Baal that were defeated by Elijah on Mount Carmel in 1 Kings 18, Venice is made up of 118 canals, or islands, I should say, 118 islands, which hints at 1 Kings 18. All right. And also, it's related to Israel, too, because Venice was one of the places that the Jews went to after they were exiled from Spain. It was a major place that the Jews fled to, a big center, which I visited when I went to Venice. It still exists. There's still a small Jewish community in the midst of the Venice islands and canals there. Okay. All right. So why don't we I was talking about Paul Simon a second ago, so why don't we finish this? Because on this date here, 119, which hints at Revelation 9:11, which symbolizes the demonic possession of those who take the mark of the Antichrist, Paul Simon, but also more importantly in this case, actually, it symbolizes 9/11 in 2001, which was the big warning from God to America to repent and turn back to God, or else judgment and destruction. And that's why the song that Paul Simon sang at the President Jimmy Carter's pre-inaugural ball was American Tune, one of his hits. He also has another hit, America, which is from Simon and Garfunkel's 4th album. Anyway, the lyrics of American Tune include the mention of the Mayflower and Apollo 11, the landing on the moon. The Mayflower had 101 passengers. That rhymes with Apollo 11. The Mayflower also took, infamously, unexpectedly, 66 days to cross the Atlantic because they encountered a storm that blew them way off course and caused them to land in New England instead of their destination, Virginia. Had they gone to Virginia, they wouldn't have survived. But God did this, and Cape Cod looks like a hook because it symbolizes the age of fishing for men, which God used America and England and Canada and Australia to do and spread the gospel around the world in the 19th and 20th centuries. Anyway, that's why they got hooked into Cape Cod. But anyway, it was 101 passengers that landed, and 10 years later was Winthrop with his 11 ships. And Winthrop delivered a famous sermon, a shining city on a hill, that was derived from Deuteronomy chapter 28. Okay, that's why 28 is so important, which is how it ties to Paul Simon, because he sings about the Mayflower. And 9/11 pointed to the Mayflower and Winthrop's 11 ships, because It was Flight 11 with a crew of 11 people that flew into the twin towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state to join the Union. And New York City is made of 11 letters, and on and on. Jesus coined the phrase the 11th hour, which is in English an idiom that means, which in ancient Israel referred to the last hour of daylight before darkness, and in English is an idiom that means last chance. Time is running out, as in last chance for America to repent and turn back to God. Well, there are only two nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God in the Bible: Israel and America. The Pilgrims saw their crossing of the Atlantic and their escape from persecution from the King of England to their promised land as analogous to the escape of the Israelites from the persecution of the King of Egypt and through the desert and crossing the Jordan River into their promised land. And they did it for God. The Pilgrims came to America for God. All right. Now, Apollo 11, because the Apollo missions ended with Apollo 17, which was the last time that an American stepped on the moon. It was when America departed the moon. The moon is symbolic of Christ. It is a giant rock, and in the Bible, rock is symbolism for Jesus. Also, the sun symbolizes God the Father, and the sun's light is too bright for us to gaze at, but we can gaze at the sun's light reflected off of the moon. And that's why watching for the timing of the moon in the Bible is symbolic of watching for the timing of the Lord's return, which includes moon signs, including Apollo 11 and 17. Which is why after Flight 11, with its crew of 11, hit the Twin Towers that looked like a giant 11 in New York State, the 11th state, 17 minutes later was the second tower that was struck by the second plane, which made it a second witness. Because prior to the second plane, the world was watching live and wondering if it was an accident or terrorism, which makes it a sign from God. Because on 9/11, America's divine protection and blessings were temporarily removed, which is what Washington warned of inside Trinity Chapel at Ground Zero after his inauguration as the first president at the founding of the nation. He said inside the chapel, if America were to ever turn away from God, it would lose its divine protection and blessings. Which is why Trinity Chapel today is known as the Miracle Chapel, because it was the only building at Ground Zero that survived and did so without even a broken window or a scratch, because of the 70-year-old sycamore tree that was uprooted protecting the chapel. Today there's a 20-foot-high bronze statue of the roots of the tree that saved the chapel. That's because in Isaiah chapter 9:11, which is one of the verses one reads if they are using a 365-day Bible divided into readings for each day of the year, on every 9/11 includes Isaiah 9:11, which says the bricks have fallen and the sycamore trees have been uprooted, because it referred to the raid of the ancient Assyrians on the northern kingdom of Israel. The Assyrians were the world's first documented terrorists, and on 9/11, the terrorists came from that same region of the world. And the northern kingdom was hit by the Assyrians, and that's why the North Tower was first hit. After the Israelites didn't heed the warning, then the southern kingdom was also destroyed, and that's why the southern tower was hit 17 minutes later. And it was hit 17 minutes later because it symbolized America's departure from Christ in Apollo 17. The two planes struck the two towers 17 minutes apart, and that's why the two space shuttle disasters were almost exactly 17 years apart. Literally. They're commemorated on the same day every year because of it, and the two space shuttle disasters were 17 years apart because it points to Apollo 17 and America's departure from the moon, which symbolizes America's departure from Christ. Which all points back to John Winthrop's speech at the founding of the nation. Before the Pilgrims got off the ships, Winthrop gave his speech derived from chapter 28 of Deuteronomy, which speaks of God's promises of blessings or curses to the Israelites that Moses told them before they crossed the Jordan River into the Promised Land. And so when the pilgrims crossed the Atlantic, before they entered the Promised Land, they heard about these promises of blessings and curses in Deuteronomy 28 through John Winthrop, who lived on Governor's Island, the first governor, which is where Flight 11 departed from Logan Airport. The leader of the 11 ships lived on the island on which the Flight 11 departed and then struck the towers that looked like a giant 11. The reason for 11 also is because it's symbolic of reflection. If God were to use a number which was symbolic of reflection, it would be 1 and 1, which hints at the promises of blessings and curses, a reflection, a contrast. The blessings or curses were dependent on whether or not the Jews would heed God's commandments. And or turn away from God. And America has done this. It had the same opportunity that ancient Israel had. And it was divinely protected and blessed. But Washington warned of this, and that's why God pointed to the chapel he warned of this in, Trinity Chapel, the only building that survived the Ground Zero attack. Washington was born on the date 2/22, February 22nd, which is why exactly 222 months after 9/11 was Coronavirus Day, in which Trump gave his 11-minute speech about coronavirus that ended precisely as the clock on the live TV news screen ticked 9:11 p.m. This date was known ahead of time. It was predicted by myself in November of 2019 as being a day on which something very big, bad, and world-changing was going to happen. And I was not saying about any other date in 2020. And then this is what happened. It was Coronavirus Day. It was the day that the World Health Organization officially declared the CVD disease to be a pandemic. And Trump gave his speech. It was also the day that the NBA shut down the first sports league, which then shut down the nation after the first player tested positive and the first celebrity announced on this day that he had the CVD, which was Tom Hanks, and on and on. And I knew this day ahead of time. I predicted, in other words, the CVD disease. And it occurred, and the hardest hit city of the CVD disease was New York City, which is where the 9/11 events occurred exactly 222 months earlier, because God was pointing to George Washington, who consecrated the nation to God, and Washington was born on the date 222. And he did this consecration in the Trinity Chapel at Ground Zero of 9/11, the only building to survive, which is why it's called the Miracle Chapel. And it's because of what he said, which was that America would lose its divine protection and blessings if it were to turn away from God. Well, since 9/11, America hasn't turned back to God, it has raced exponentially further away from God. And now America is about to be destroyed. And that's why Paul Simon's death will indicate this, because Paul Simon is pointing to, for 3 transgressions and for 4, the idiom that means the tolerable limit of transgressions has been exceeded and now judgment and destruction are unavoidable. In other words, it will be the bookend to the warning on 9/11, Paul Simon's death, which is why Paul Simon's album Bookends is the album that contains the song America, because Paul Simon's death will be the bookend to 9/11, and Paul Simon is involved in the other end of the bookends, because after 9/11, he opened the first broadcast of Saturday Night Live, which is broadcast in Manhattan, the location of the 9/11 events. He sang the song The Boxer. Boxing is about punching someone in the head and falling down. That's the goal. And Paul Simon is predicted to fall and injure his head and then die. But it's 28 days from these signs here, because Paul Simon points to Deuteronomy 28, as I've now explained. Because of his song American Tune, which was sung on the date 119, which hints at 9/11, and 9/11 pointed to the Mayflower and John Winthrop and his 11 ships at Deuteronomy 28. As did Apollo 11 and 17. And the nation was founded on God, but also was founded with George Washington, and also Washington was one of the founders of the nation who signed the Declaration of Independence in 1776, which is why from the day that Paul Simon sang about the Mayflower and Apollo 11, it is 17,760 days to this date here, September 4th, 2025, when it was reported, when the news was broken, that Joe Biden had a severe head wound because he was wearing a bandage, and it was caught. He was caught wearing this head bandage after coming out of church in this city called Rehoboth, or whatever you pronounce it, which is equal to 91 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. In Delaware, the first state, which hints at 9/11. And this is 9 plus 10 plus 10 days, which hints at 9/11, to the P Diddy signs, which is 28 days before Paul Simon is predicted to die from a head injury. And Joe Biden, the big story was because of his age, because it was cancer that he had the head bandage, skin cancer, which is what someone gets when they're old. And that's why the age of Joe Biden was mentioned in all of the news stories. Joe Biden is 82, which hints at 28, which is why it connects to the Deuteronomy chapter 28 sign, 17,760 days earlier, which hints at 1776 and the founding of the nation, and is in turn, 9 plus 10 plus 10 plus 28 days to the death of Paul Simon in the 28th state, which will point to all of what I'm talking about, which is essentially Deuteronomy chapter 28. Now, down here, we have an exact 8 weeks connection from the date 8/8. And this is related to Paul Simon because God is using Paul Simon to point to Revelation chapter 8. The first verse of Revelation chapter 8 describes a period of silence that was heard in heaven, the sound of silence. The sound of silence was Paul Simon's first hit that launched his career. And incidentally, it was on the album Wednesday Morning, 3 a.m., which again hints at for 3 transgressions and for 4, which is what we have here. The third of the month, the 4-year sentence, as I explained earlier. Okay, and so this was a day that we expected in advance to be a date for prophetic signs related to Paul Simon. And then that's exactly what happened. We had the first, essentially, the first in recent months. Well, no, that's not even true. Anyway, we had a Paul Simon sign on the date 8/1, which was also expected in advance. We had 2 Paul Simon signs on that day, and we had 2 Paul Simon signs on this day, 7 days later. And one of the signs back on the 1st of August, 7 days before, was the sale of the mansion, the storied mansion of the producer, the most prolific TV producer in history, Aaron Spelling, who produced the longest running drama series in history, Seventh Heaven. But anyway, why that's all relevant is explained in other videos. The point is that 8/8 was also a date, and it also pointed to a verse, because 8/1 pointed to Revelation 8:1, and 8/8, August 8th, points to Revelation 8:8, which is a trumpet judgment, one of the 7 trumpet judgments, which is why Paul Simon's newest album is 7 Psalms. And this trumpet judgment mentions the destruction of ships. And as I explain in the other videos, it's symbolism for America because of Isaiah chapter 23. And the ships of Tarshish, and the daughter of Tarshish. And we have all kinds of evidence that indicates Tarshish in the ancient world was Great Britain. And Great Britain in history was known for it being the world empire due to its ships. It was also the cross-pollinator of culture in the world because of its trading with ships. And then the daughter of Great Britain is America, and it too is and still is the dominant power in the world mostly because of its navy, its ships. Anyway, that's another story. But we have these ship signs on the date 8/8, which is pointing to Revelation 8:8 about the destruction of ships. But the ship sign we received was one of a number of Royal Caribbean cruise ship signs. And it was the announcement of the news. It was the news announcement that the water slide on the ship had busted at the top of the slide when a man was sliding down the slide who got injured because of it. And it was a slip, slide, and away sign. Paul Simon's hit, slip, slide, and away, which is what Paul Simon will do when he dies. He will slip and fall and injure his head and will die. That's why we had a slip, slide, and away sign related to Paul Simon on this date. But there were two such signs because also on this day, the NASCAR race winner in Victory Lane, as he was celebrating on top of the roof of his car, slipped and fell off the roof in front of the cameras and busted his collarbone on the ground. He slipped and fell and got himself injured. The interesting thing as well is that he was driving car number 88. And so in the images of all of this, with him falling in front of the press in Victory Lane, was the car number. On the date 8/8 was car number 88. Also, he is known for being so young and winning these car races. He's only 19 years old. So he's known for this number 19, and 19 is the 8th prime number. And so we have this exact 8 weeks. 2, these boat signs that I explained. And this was a ship sign, same symbolism, same meaning. In other words, these boat signs here are Paul Simon signs, because Paul Simon points to Revelation chapter 8. And the reason why I included this in this diagram, because it's not really P Diddy related here, or the reason why it's relevant and related is because of these boat signs. That's why I had to include this. The reason why God connected this exact 8 weeks is because he's confirming that these boat signs are Paul Simon signs, because this is clearly a Paul Simon sign on the date 8/8, slip, slide, and away. Paul Simon is Jewish, by the way, and this is a sign involving boats in Israel, as I explained. So, okay. Now, I mentioned earlier I was going to explain why all of the Vens. So we had on this day the 4th Venezuela boat, in which four people were killed. And we had the last of the 42 boats being caught 42 miles away from Gaza. So we had these boat signs, and this was on the 4-year day of the 4-year sentence for P Diddy, whose son was sued for assaulting the woman on a boat, right? I mentioned that. Now, what I also forgot to mention is that this date of the lawsuit and the day that P Diddy posted his victory video, which I explained earlier, this 911 days is related to this, which is that P Diddy was born exactly 9 times 11 months after the birth of the Antichrist, Obama, the 44th president, which also hints at not only the warning of judgment on 9/11, when the 4th of the 4 planes crashed and killed 44 people, 40 plus 40 miles outside of Pittsburgh in a 40-acre crater because the plane crashed at a 40-degree angle. Okay, it also points to Revelation 9/11, which is, again, like I mentioned earlier, symbolism for the demonic possession of people who have taken the mark, the SHOT. Okay. Now, the reason for the Venezuela boat and P Diddy, who's the big part of the trial with P Diddy centered on him beating his ex-girlfriend and the testimony from his ex-girlfriend, etc. It really centered on his Okay, that the day of the release of that Cassandra Ventura video connects with all of this too. It was exactly 66 plus 6 weeks earlier to the P Diddy sentence of the trial involving Cassandra Ventura. And we have the Venezuela boats, but again, it also connects to the Venice canals, like I explained earlier, and how relevant it all is, the Venice canals, to all of this. This is because Venezuela means Little Venice. And it was named by Amerigo Vespucci. It's all about America, including Paul Simon, because that's why his hit America from his, okay, and also American Tune, this song right here, which is connected with this like profound number of days, right? Like I explained already. So Venezuela means Little Venice. That's more confirmation that this Venice Canals sign connects with the Venezuela boat sign. Furthermore, it was 444 days, and it was the 4th Venezuela boat, and 4 people were killed in the boat. And it was the day of P Diddy's 4-year sentence, and he's relevant for boats and drugs, but because of his son who was sued for assaulting this woman on a boat. Okay. And again, it's 28 days to the predicted death of Paul Simon in the 28th state. Okay. Now, another thing about boats is that this date, October 3rd, is the 276th day of the calendar year. That's amazing. It's amazing because this number is one of 3 unusually specific numbers in the New Testament, which all coincidentally are triangular numbers. And this number is in context, or is describing in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, the 276 souls that were shipwrecked on a boat, on a ship. So this date of the calendar year is also symbolism for ships and boats. And we have the boat signs, the Israel boat sign and the Venezuela boat sign. Now, 276 is the 23rd triangular number. And God pairs 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections. And this is how God's true big picture of signs, patterns, and connections works. It works on the principle of second and third and multiple witnesses confirming a matter as the Bible says is required. And this is what makes what is being explained on this channel true and not a product of one's imagination, and different and unique than everything else on the internet that claims to be an analysis of God's prophetic signs. And if we think about it, one simple way in which he would provide a second witness for us is through pairing certain numbers together, such as 23 and 44. And I know this because I have been studying his big picture of signs, patterns, and connections from morning until night for more than full-time hours for more than 7 years. The reason for pairing 23 and 44 to confirm the signs and connections is that it's all about the Antichrist, who is the 44th president, who is the basketball president, who wore jersey number 23 in high school. God also pairs 9, 23, and 44. 45 is the 9th triangular number, as 276 is the 23rd triangular number, and the 44th president, the basketball president, who wore jersey number 23, was inaugurated in 2009. Also, the inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in Ezekiel chapter 9, and it alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, so that's why 450 protesters connecting with the 45th anniversary of Apocalypse Now that cost $45 million, and P. Diddy's post of victory, and that being Apocalypse Now symbolism on the date 4/5, which ends at 45. By the way, the video is like a little mini movie. I forgot to mention this, and it's 8 minutes long. Paul Simon is pointing to Revelation chapter 8. He's a goat of music composition. P. Diddy is the goat, or a sort of goat, of rap. But also, for 8 minutes is, and it's like basically exactly 8 minutes, okay, because it's prophetic. And 8 minutes is 4 plus 4 minutes. And that's a 44, which connects with P. Diddy's 4-year sentence and the 4th Venezuela boat. Okay, so that's why victory is 4 plus 4 minutes. It's also obviously for the purpose of pointing to the 44th president, will be the Antichrist, dwelling in the White House, which is made up of 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. Trump is adding an extra room to it right now, which is also prophetic because that gives us 133 rooms, which in 133 is the 44th semi-prime number. The video is called Victory, and P Diddy was sentenced to 50 months because his sentence for 4 years is 444 plus 444 plus 444 days exactly to the 50th day, which is what Pentecost means, and the day of the rapture and the victory of God's faithful followers and servants. That's amazing. This connects. This victory video is for the purpose of confirming the date of the rapture and the victory of God's people from the Antichrist, the rescue from the Antichrist, the 44th president, which is why this profound number here of days. Exactly 444 plus 444 plus 444 to P. Diddy's 4-year sentence. And if I didn't mention yet, the big song that launched his career, I'll Be Missing You, became big because of the sample he took from Every Breath You Take, which Sting has admitted or said that most people don't understand the lyrics and the intention of the song, which was meant to symbolize or be descriptive of an authoritarian state. In other words, it's Antichrist symbolism. P. Diddy's song won Rap Song of the Year at the 40th Grammy Awards. In other words, the song that is associated with P. Diddy is this song. It won the Song of the Year at the 40th Awards, and he is sentenced to a 4-year sentence. 44 plus 44, 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the rescue of the 44th president, who will be watching every breath people take in America and beyond. Now, I forgot to mention that 28 is 7 times 4, and it connected with the signs on this date here, the singing by Paul Simon at Carter's inauguration ball that talked about the Mayflower, and all of that pointed to, and Apollo 11 pointed to the 11 ships, and Deuteronomy 28, which I explained earlier, but it connected with this number of days, which symbolizes the birth of America on the date 7/4, July 4th, in 1776, which is more astounding confirmation that I forgot to mention that this does in fact point to Deuteronomy 28, as 28 is 7 times 4, which is why Paul Simon, who sings America and American Tune, will die in the 7 times 4th state. Now, getting back to the significance of the date of the year, which reveals symbolism for ships in itself because of the number 276, this date outside of the US is 310. This is relevant because the boat in Israel was outside of the US on the date 310, as was the boat blown up off the coast of Venezuela. Okay, in America it's 10-3, but outside the US it's 310, and H310 in Strong's Hebrew Bible Concordance is astounding because it is exactly what we are talking about with this sign. It means the hind part, behind, following after. It was pointing to the last boat in the flotilla, because that's exactly why it's a sign in the first place. The boat got past the Israelis because they were surprised by this boat, and it was the first boat to enter within the 17-mile blockade in the 4 times 4-year blockade, which, by the way, is also more confirmation for the 4-year sentence and 444. You got the idea to the rapture. The 4 times 4-year blockade was broken for the first time on this date because it was lagging behind the other boats. It was delayed, which is exactly, it was the hind boat, the hind part, following after. The last boat in the flotilla was the sign. And by the way, it was the only boat that was captured on this date. The others were captured the day before. It was in the early hours of this date that this boat was captured, and that's because it was trailing behind. It was behind the hind part of the protest flotilla, the following after. It's amazing. Which brings me back to Amerigo Vespucci. Because Amerigo Vespucci, which is symbolic of America, because America is named after Amerigo Vespucci, who was the explorer, who was the first to recognize that what was being discovered was not part of Asia. They hadn't found a new route to East Asia. They, as Amerigo Vespucci wrote, have discovered an previously unknown fourth part of the world. A fourth part of the world. And Vespucci named Venezuela after Little Venice, or Venezuela means Little Venice, and it was named after Venice. Vespucci named it. And this was the day of the fourth boat off the coast of Venezuela that Vespucci named, with 4 people that died on the boat. And Vespucci is known for declaring that the land that had been discovered was not part of Asia, but a fourth of the world that was previously unknown. It's another 4, which is clearly being pointed to here through the 4-year sentence of P Diddy, and he's again associated with boats and also drugs. And it was a drug boat, the 4th one off the coast of Venezuela. And again, Venezuela is associated with Amerigo Vespucci, who declared the 4th of the world. But all of this is symbolism for America, God's Gentile nation. Like I said earlier, I'm sure, there are only 2 nations in the history of the world that were founded on a relationship with God and the Bible, Israel and America. America, God designed to be his nation of Christian disciples that would spread the gospel around the world. America is God's Gentile nation. God is focused on America, like he was Israel. America is un-Israel. That's controversial for many people, but it's a fact. And the prediction here will prove this, obviously, because I'm saying Paul Simon will die on this date because he's symbolism for America, and he's the bookends for the judgment warning on America, etc., like I explained earlier. And when this is correct, it'll prove these controversial things that I'm saying. If it wasn't already obvious to people because of their doctrine about the church replacing Israel and stuff like that, no, America is un-Israel. It is God's Gentile nation, and God is focused on America. And that's the answer to the question that many people ask me, why are you so focused on America with God's prophetic signs? And the answer is, because God is. God isn't focused on Venezuela. The Venezuela boat sign is because it's related to America. It is all about America and Israel. But the signs here are warning of judgment for America, his Gentile nation, the nation God loves, the nation God blessed. And, like ancient Israel, the judgment on a people, an individual, or a nation is commensurate with the amount of light and blessings that was received. And so the judgment that's coming for America does not compare to the judgment that's coming to other parts of the world in the coming days. The Antichrist is an American president, for example, because it is all about America. I'll give you another thing. In Matthew 25, when it talks about the nations and the separation of the sheep and the goats, it is not talking about the separation of believers and unbelievers. It's talking about the separation of the people within the nations that knew Christ. The judgment coming is for the nations that knew Christ, that have now turned away from Christ, and as a result are coming against Israel, who have previously supported Israel. Where a person or a nation stands in regards to Israel is indicative of where they stand with God. All right. I think I've covered all of this here down here now. Okay. So what remains in the diagram is this last top part. So the day of the day of the beginning of this Sean Combs, P Diddy drama was this date, March 25th, 2024, the day that the FBI raided his 2 mansions. Okay? One of them was in Los Angeles and one of them was in Miami. Los Angeles in God's signs in general is symbolism for fallen angels. Los Angeles is Spanish for the angels. It's symbolism for fallen angels. In other words, the angels that come from the bottomless pit and then demonically possess people who have taken the mark that was all about combating the corona, virus, right? That's why Miami, because Miami is symbolism for the sun. It's in the sunshine state, but God is using the Miami Dolphins in his signs it's very important. It's not just trivial. And for those that think it's trivial because it's sports, you have no idea. Sports are very important in God's signs. Anyway, the logo for the Miami Dolphins is not only a sun with a dolphin jumping in front of it, a big orange sun, but it's the corona of the sun. If you look at the logo of the Miami Dolphins, it's like what you would see during an eclipse. It's like the outside of the sun. The eclipses, by the way, are amazing in that they provide an opportunity to learn about the sun's corona, which we wouldn't otherwise be able to learn, which is one piece of evidence that everything was designed by a God, right? And if you didn't know, I'll just tell you quickly here. There's something in astronomy called the grand coincidence. And this grand coincidence is that the sun just happens to be exactly 400 times further away from Earth than the moon. And this coincidence is what provides us with perfect eclipses. And as far as we know, this is the only place in the universe in which you can experience from a planet perfect eclipses. And in Genesis 1:10 or 1:14, it says that the lights in the sky are for prophetic signs, primarily. And the brightest lights in the sky are, of course, the sun and the moon. And when they come together in eclipses, in other words, it's a potential for a prophetic sign, especially in these last days. Well, anyway, it's 400. It's not 399 or 401. It's exactly 400 times further away than the moon. Well, the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet is also a number, because like Roman letters, they're also numbers. And the last letter is the letter that is the number for 400. And these letters in the Hebrew alphabet are also symbols for things. This letter that's the symbol for the number 400 is also the symbol for prophetic signs. In other words, whoever created the Hebrew alphabet also created eclipses. All right. So the day of the 2 mansions, so we got the significance of the 2 mansions in Los Angeles and Miami. Well, Corona, because as I'm saying, all of this is about the things, right? Even at the freak out parties or the freak off parties, the drugs were consumed by putting a thing in them, right? And even still, drugs in themselves are symbolic of the thing, as I explained earlier. Now, that's why we have this connection here to the corona symbolized by Miami. And anyway, the 2 mansions, I think, are also symbolic of the second coming. But this date is 18 months and 8 days before the P Diddy sentence. So the whole duration of the P Diddy drama, arguably, is this number, 188. And that's because God uses this number frequently in his big picture of signs because of H188 in the Strong's Hebrew Concordance, which is the word that means woe, exclamation mark, and is used in the Bible in the context of extreme judgment from God, including in the fifth trumpet judgment that speaks of the demonic possession of those who will take the mark of the Antichrist, which is what P Diddy is pointing to, as I explained. And that's also, again, like I explained, confirmed with the fourth boat, the drug boat, and the 4 people, okay, and 13 months and 18 days, because that's the mark right there, that number of Revelation 13:18, to these signs that were all about the bloody hand and the, as I explained earlier, okay. P Diddy is about the mark, and we have a woe connection for the duration of the drama, all right? Now there's one last part here up at the top. We have this date here, like I said, was the day of the release of the video on a security camera in a hotel in which P Diddy is beating up on his ex-girlfriend, Cassandra Ventura. This day is 66 plus 6 weeks exactly to P Diddy's sentence, and of course, Cassandra Ventura's and her lawyer's reaction, okay, because it really was focused on Cassandra Ventura also. So this is all relevant. Now, again, I explained earlier, I believe, maybe I didn't, but Cassandra, the name, hints at Sandra, the first person to take the thing on this date, which was 6,000 plus 6,000 plus 6,000 minutes to this date, which is 66 plus 6 weeks to this. Now, this is also 5 times 5 times 50 days, and it connects to P Diddy's 50-month sentence, which connects to the rapture on the 50th day, Pentecost. And the rapture rescue will be from the thing. So the first thing that was taken on this date here clearly, profoundly connects to the rapture and rescue from the thing on Pentecost, which means 50th day, and that's why the 5 times 5 times 50 days connection. But also it's Revelation, it's the 5th trumpet judgment that people will also be rescued from, which is the demonic possession of those who take the thing. That's why on this day here we had all these other signs that confirmed all of this, including the big one, Pope Francis declaring, because he supposedly has the power to declare these sorts of things, which is ridiculous, but he declared that he has the sole authority as the Pope to declare and authorize, confirm supernatural phenomena, including sightings of Mary and other things that will be very relevant in the near future, which is why this is so important. Because the Antichrist is the Pope, and it is Pope Francis. He is predicted to be resurrected from the grave on April 26th, 2029. And anyway, this date of the Pope's announcement, by the way, was exactly 415 months after the San Francisco, as in Pope Francis, earthquake, the 1989 World Series earthquake in the area code 415, hence the 415 months connection to Pope Francis. Now, this was the same day as the release of the trailer for the movie The Substance, which is exactly what is coming. So in the movie The Substance, Demi Moore, who, by the way, was celebrated for her comeback in cinema, which her career fell apart after she played a harlot, a prostitute. And we have in Revelation 17, which describes the Vatican and Rome and Roman Catholicism, we have a description of a harlot and a prostitute, the woman who rides the beast. The beast is Pope Francis, and the woman is symbolized by this movie, The Substance, with Demi Moore. But in the movie, she takes this in the thing. She takes a thing and puts it in. You know what I'm talking about. The Injection, right? And this thing makes her younger. That's exactly what's coming. This promise of immortality and reversal of aging through this transhumanism technology that is the thing. That's what will be promised, and it will be delivered to us through the Pope, but also through the aliens, which are in reality demons pretending to be aliens, which will supposedly claim to have made Pope Francis the ambassador for the world. But what I'm saying is that what's coming is a thing, an SHOT, that will promise what is the theme or the plot of this movie. Now, the movie also stars Dennis Quaid, which is why on this same day, Trump was at the Lincoln-Reagan GOP dinner, and in this same year was the release of the movie Reagan, starring Dennis Quaid. Also on this day, God's trumpet attended Barron Trump's graduation ceremony, which is symbolic of the last Trump. Because Barron Trump is the youngest Trump, he is the symbolic last Trump. Incidentally, this is an important thing too about Barron Trump that God wants you to know, is that Trump and Melania initially thought about having an abortion, but decided and changed their mind. And I think Trump has said, and they've both said, it was the best decision of their lives. And that's when Trump became a true supporter of abortion rights. But anyway, the attendance at the ceremony, it was a big deal too, because Trump had to request this date off from the judge in the trial that he was attending. So this was in the news, the date itself, ahead of time. But it was prior to that already known that God was pointing to this date. This date was known ahead of time, as was this date, this date, this date, this date. All of these dates were known ahead of time. Anyway, so, but the reason why this is astounding is that this connects with this 666 plus 66 weeks. I'll say that again. 66 plus 6 weeks, and then 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the rapture and graduation and then ceremony at the time of the last trump. Because Paul, in speaking prophetically, speaks of at the time of the rapture, there being a last trump. In archaic English, the word trump means trumpet, or the sounding of a trumpet. So the last trumpet sound is this term in the Bible that is associated with the rapture, which is a graduation. It's when God's faithful will just disappear and go straight to heaven. And they'll be transformed into their resurrection bodies, their eternal bodies. It will be a graduation. It's amazing. You see this? This is amazing, this connection here. Not only that, this 66 plus 6 weeks is almost exactly 138% of a year, and the name Donald Trump is equal to 138 in simple English gematria. A equals 1, B equals 2, C equals 3. That's more confirmation of the significance of these two Trump signs here on this date. Now, this 66 plus 6 weeks is also the equivalent of 4 times 4 months and 4 times 4 days. And then it connects with 444 plus 444 and plus 444 days to the date of the rapture and the rescue and the graduation at the last trump. Oh, the name Ventura means things to come, which is why Cassandra Ventura is a prophetic sign through P Diddy and all of this, what I'm describing, of things to come. That's what this video is about. It's about these things to come. The persecution through the mark, the thing, and the rapture, and the prediction for Paul Simon's death, and etc. Also, what's coming is violence. in America in our current civil war. Okay? And arguably, a fight between a couple, a boyfriend-girlfriend, is like a civil war. Symbolism, at least, for a civil war. So the violence in the video between the couple is symbolic of the coming descent into violence in our current civil war. And as we can see, we can already see the beginnings of it, but I've known that this was going to happen for many years. God's been communicating the coming, not only that, what's coming is a genocide. If you are wise and you know about, for example, the 10 stages of genocide, which you can find on the internet, we are clearly in the latter stages of a coming genocide perpetrated by the left on true conservatives and Christians. That's what's coming. But it's a spiritual war, and this is all prophesied as well in the Bible, this coming genocide and civil war. But it's a spiritual war. The people on the left are with Satan. That's why they hate conservatives and Christians. As Dennis Prager used to say, or would say, or says, I should say, there are two kinds of people: those who hate evil and those who hate and fight against those who hate evil. And that's the left. The left hates those who hate evil and is fighting against those who fight against evil. That's essentially what's going on. Okay, so we've done the top here now. There's one more thing probably up here that I didn't get to, which is that this day was the first day that the Dow reached 40,000, the 40,000 level, and it was exactly 40 days after the eclipse that went over America, that went over 7 cities named Nineveh. And in the Bible, Jonah, the prophet, preached 40 days of repentance to the Ninevites. That's why we knew ahead of time to add 40 days. And that's why it was predicted ahead of time that on this day, the Dow would reach 40,000 for the first time. This was predicted ahead of time. But unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention to this until the day before. So it was only predicted one day before, and so no skeptic is going to believe that that was anything profound. But it was, because this date was known for it being 40 days after the eclipse that went over the 7 cities named Nineveh in America, and that's because of Jonah preaching 40 days of repentance, or else destruction. Well, actually, he didn't preach or else. The Ninevites repented in case God would change his mind. And by the way, this is an example of God changing his mind, because contrary to what the predestination Calvinists say, God can change his mind and doesn't know everything. He knows all possibilities. Anyway, but if he did know every decision a person would make, then we wouldn't have free will. But that's another subject. All right, now, on the day of the 40,000 Dow, Scheffler, which means keys, means bailiff, I should say, which is essentially meaning keys, because that's what bailiffs are. They're the man with the keys. I think even that's the root of the word bailiff. And anyway, Scott Scheffler was charged with 4 crimes. He was the #1 golfer. And he finished the day 5 under par after he was charged in the morning before his round. And that was a 415. And this was exactly 415 months after the earthquake in the area code 415. He was also charged with 4 crimes in the 15th state, which is another 415. But anyway, he was charged with 4 crimes, which rhymes with the 4 times 4 months and 4 times 4 days, to the 4-year sentence of P Diddy. And that's relevant, by the way. I just realized that just now. Of course, this is a criminal thing, and it's 4. And then it's a criminal thing, his sentence of 4 years. Right. And it's 444 plus 444 plus 444 days before the rapture. And that's symbolic of heaven. And the name of the golf course, which was, I think, the PGA Championship, was Valhalla. It was at the Valhalla golf course, which is symbolic of heaven, of course, in Norse mythology. Okay, wow. Wow, actually, wow. Now, I think I have covered this entire diagram. What I'm going to do next is what I said at the beginning of the video, is get into part 2 here, where I'm just going to read the more profound summaries and insights regarding all of this. There's more to come, okay? All right, as we can see here, this email was composed on October 4th. This prediction is that Paul Simon will slip and fall on October 31st, injure his head, and then die. And let's get into it. This is just things that I wrote that explains more what's going on here, more regarding what I have explained in the diagram. Okay, in his wisdom, God used arguably the most famous rapper of all time, Sean Combs, also known as P Diddy, to tie together numerous prophetic signs that engender a story that God is telling about what is coming in the end times. Again, his ex-girlfriend's name, Ventura, means things to come. The attached diagram is the ultimate P Diddy signs diagram. However, it isn't about P Diddy. The connections incorporate many other signs. This diagram is the product of a lot of time and effort last year in 2024, attempting to discern God's signs. It all comes together now. The result is that the date of the rapture is confirmed. As well, the connections confirm that Obama, and Paul Simon will die or fall on October 31st and die from a head injury, unless October 31st is another step in the trail of signs, which it could be. In that case, there will be relevant, clear prophetic signs involving or related to Paul Simon. This is far too much to type out in a write-up. I recommend closely studying the diagram, then read the notes I will include in this email thread while referring back to the diagram. Soon I will also produce a video explaining the diagram, okay, which I just did. Diddy's 2 mansions were raided on this date 18 months, 8 days before his sentence, which is 2 times 50, 25 times 2 months is his sentence. That hints at the number in the Bible that symbolizes the period of the end times, 2,520. Okay, Diddy equals apocalypse now because of his video. This is all point form, notation format. And I won't explain it in too much detail if I've already explained it in the diagram part of this video, okay? So I'm just gonna go through this quickly because much of it's already been explained. Okay, so P Diddy video was posted again, like I said, on the date 4/5, which hints at the 45th anniversary of the Apocalypse Now movie that cost $45 million. Now, the date 10/3, he was sentenced to 4 years, 2 months, which is symbolic of the 42 months of the Antichrist in Bible prophecy, and it's 13 months, 18 days, his sentence after the Apocalypse Now signs, which I explained earlier. All right. Okay, and that's what I explained earlier too. This 4-year sentence connects with 444 plus 444 plus 444 days to the rapture. Okay, let's see. Now there was the Christian boat sign, which I already explained. He spiked the drink. He was being sued for it. The female's name is Grace O'Marque, and she said, "Are you drugging me?" And and his son Christian replied, "Take the shot." I had forgotten about the news of the, okay, so let's see. Also, speaking of fight, because this was the day of the release of the footage of the security camera of the fight between P. Diddy and his ex-girlfriend. This was also the day that Trump and Biden agreed to a debate. And the debate terms and date, okay? So this was symbolic of a war, as was the fight. And as I mentioned earlier, it's all symbolic of the coming or current civil war that is leading to genocide. Okay, let's see. I'm just gonna, I'm gonna look at it and see if I've already explained it. So we'll skip the parts that have already been explained. Okay, J.D. Vance made a joke on the day of the boat that was blown up. And JD equals 45 in simple English gematria. And on that day of the Venezuela boat with the 4 deaths, the 4th boat, 450 protesters were arrested, right? And that's the connection to 45 again. Again, it connects to the 45th anniversary of the Apocalypse Now movie that cost $45 million. And P Diddy on the date 4/5, which hints at 45, posted his victory video, which hints at Apocalypse Now. Again, because the video is apocalyptic, and Dennis Hopper stars as an Antichrist type figure in the video. All right, let's see. You know what, I'm just going to say, I did a pretty good job explaining the diagram, so this isn't going to be as necessary as I thought going through the notes here, because it's really already done, because I did a good job. I explained how Amerigo Vespucci claimed the 4th of the world was what was being discovered, not Asia or India, right? And anyway, it was because that was, and he named Venezuela after Venice, and on the day of the Venezuela boat, it was the 4th boat, 4 were killed, 4th part of the world. Anyway, Venice, I mentioned this, okay? Venice has 118 islands, which hints at 1 Kings 18, which is regarding the 450 false prophets, 450 protesters, okay? Yeah. Oh, here's something. Amerigo Vespucci named Venezuela in 1499, and the number 1,499 is the 239th prime number. Well, these are the numbers that God pairs together, 23 and 9, to confirm the signs and connections, as I explained earlier. Okay, and it hints at Obama, because he is the president that was inaugurated in 2009 and is the basketball president who wore jersey number 23. And again, the mark is the inverse of it. The mark of the Antichrist is described in the 9th chapter of Ezekiel, and it changes a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. Well, 1499 is also the 52nd super prime number, and 52 is 2 times 26, which hints at H226, which is the word in the Hebrew concordance for prophetic sign, which confirms that Vespucci named Venezuela in the year that made it a prophetic sign that pointed to Obama, who will be the president over America, and America is named after Amerigo Vespucci. So here I just say it's fitting, that the goat of rap, arguably the most famous rapper of all time, connects with the predicted death of Paul Simon, the goat, considered to be one of them anyway, composer of American pop music. It was designed by God that I initially confused the date 10/3 with 3/10, which it is outside the U.S., which is the date outside the U.S., including Israel, where the following behind last boat sign was. The date 3/10 hints at H310, like I explained. However, 10/3 hints at H103, which hints at the Hebrew word for to sing. P. Diddy made music with singing, as does Paul Simon. Paul Simon is Jewish, last boat off the coast of Israel. So you see how this is amazing? We have both the variations of this date giving us the profound, relevant Hebrew concordance word. To sing, because the date 10/3 with the sentencing of P. Diddy and the boats in Israel connect to the singer Paul Simon and his predicted death. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Now this is what I really wanted to get to, okay? This page right here. This could be another video in itself, but I'll just put it here because it's that profound and it's important. Hopefully you've made it this far. Hopefully you stuck with me. You'll be rewarded now. The inverse of the mark of the Antichrist is described in the 9th chapter of Ezekiel. The mark alters a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes. For this reason, God pairs the numbers 9 and 23 and 44 together to confirm the signs and connections. Charlie, which means free man, James, which was the first apostle to be martyred, Kirk, which means church, was shot, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, SHOTs, in the throat, in the four corners state, while wearing a t-shirt that said freedom, which was symbolic of restriction of free speech, because that's why he was killed. On the date 9/10, which hints at 9 times 10 equals 90, which hints at 9, when the Surgeon General from the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state, 3 nines hint at 666 when they're turned upside down, declared an end to the VACCINE mandates. This was 23 days before the fourth Venezuela boat with poisonous drugs was shot, as in the mark of the Antichrist, down and killed 4 people. That's a pairing of 23 and 44. Say 23 days from the 9s, because he was shot on the date that hints at 9, on the same day as the 9 plus 9 plus 9th state declaration from the Surgeon General of the end of the thing, which changes a person's 23 pairs of chromosomes, which is why it's 23 days, to the fourth boat with the 4 killed in it, which was carrying drugs, which is symbolic of the things, the pharmaceutical product. This was also the day of the sign involving the 42nd Israel boat, 42 nautical miles from Gaza, and this date, 10/3, connected to the water in the canals, which is symbolic of clogged blood arteries, of Venice turning green, and Israel's green pass, which hints at the fourth horse, the fourth color of the rainbow, and the plague and famine. It was exactly 4 years after the updated green pass, and P Diddy's 4-year sentence for sex trafficking related to his infamous parties in which drugs and things were consumed, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist. P. Diddy's biggest hit song, by far, was I'll Be Missing You. The song was a tribute to rapper Notorious B.I.G., who had recently died from a gunshot, which is symbolic of the mark of the Antichrist, the thing. Things that come out of guns and go into people are symbolic of things that come out of things and go into people. The song featured the R&B group named 112. 112 equals 70 plus 42. 70 is symbolic of the 70th week of the Antichrist in Daniel chapter 9, and 42 months is the period of the Antichrist. On the day that P. Diddy was sentenced for drug parties, the drug boat was shot down, and the 42nd boat was captured 42 nautical miles from Gaza. The 42nd boat was the first boat in the 4 times 4 year blockade to come within 70 miles of Gaza, which hints at 70 plus 42 equals 112, which hints at the song I'll Be Missing You. In the Batman movie massacre, exactly 70 people were injured, and the shooting, as in Mark of the Antichrist, during the Dark Knight Rises movie, was exactly 42 months after the Antichrist 44th president was inaugurated. That's a 70 and 42. 70 injured, 42 months exactly after the Dark Knight Rise of the Antichrist as the 44th president, and the movie of the massacre, the movie that was showing, was Dark Knight Rises. I'll Be Missing You. In other words, this points to the Antichrist, the song, because it's the R&B group 112. I'll Be Missing You, in other words, it points to Obama, is what I mean. I'll Be Missing You was a massive hit because of the bass guitar riff sample from the Police's song, Every Breath You Take. The lyrics of Every Breath You Take were written by Sting, which is symbolic of the mark, because it's an injection sting, the mark of the Antichrist. And it's symbolic of the stingers in Revelation chapter 9. But the stingers in Revelation chapter 9 that sting people is symbolism for the thing, the SHOT. And that's why Sting, that's why his name is Sting, because his biggest song by far is Every Breath You Take, one of the biggest songs in history. And the name of the band is The Police. What are we talking about here? Of course, we are talking about a police state and the surveillance state surrounding and enforcing the thing, the stinger. Every Breath You Take was the biggest hit in 1983 and was number one on the Billboard 100 chart for 4+4 weeks, as in the 44th president, who will lead or head the Antichrist system, the police state that will monitor every breath people take. Every Breath You Take by Sting, Stinger's Revelation 9/11, was released 9,011 days before the rise of the Dark Knight at his inauguration as the 44th president on January 20th, 2009. And again, the song was 4+4 weeks at number one. Now, Revelation 9:11 is symbolic of the demons from the bottomless pit and Apollyon that rise out of the bottomless pit, Revelation 9:11, which is why Every Breath You Take connects to the rise of the Dark Knight on his inauguration day, which connects with, like I said, 42 months to the Dark Knight Rises movie massacre. Because Revelation 9:11 is about the rising from the bottomless pit, which is why Every Breath You Take was released 9,011 days before the rise of the Dark Knight's inauguration. The band name, The Police, and the lyrics of the song hint at Big Brother and the surveillance state. According to Wikipedia, this theme is what Sting intended. Sting says that people have misinterpreted the song as a simple love song. As well, the name Sting hints at the thing, like I just said. I'll Be Missing You, P Diddy's song, was a hit because of the sample from Every Breath You Take, and I'll Be Missing You won Best Rap Song at the 40th Grammy Awards. Every Breath You Take was released exactly the 44th prime number of months before the Columbine High School mass shooting in the Four Corners state that has four corners on April 20th, 1999. And in that shooting, 4 times 4 people died, including the one that just died in 2025. So this connection here couldn't have been known until this year. Okay? I'll repeat that. This is amazing. So, Every Breath You Take was released exactly the 44th prime number of months, 193 months, before the Columbine High School shooting in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners that killed 4 times 4 people, including the 2 shooters and the one that died this year. Now that shooting was exactly 117 months before the inauguration of the 44th president. That's really relevant because 117 symbolizes let it divide. The phrase let it divide in Genesis chapter 1 in Hebrew is equal to 117 in Hebrew gematria. The dividing chapter of the Bible is Psalms 117. The year that divided the Roman Empire geographically, the year of its maximum expansion before it began contracting, was 117 AD. And Rome is symbolic of the Vatican, the headquarters of the Antichrist. And there's other reasons for 117. The middle of the eclipse in 2017, the peak of it was at 1:17 p.m. And on. And that divided the nation. It was right in the middle of the country. Divided the eclipse in the middle. And right where it peaked is where the other eclipse crossed over it in 2024. Okay. Now the inauguration was 42 months before the Dark Knight Rises massacre in the Four Corners state that has 4 corners. Okay, 42 months from the inauguration of the 44th president. And the mass shooting in the Four Corners state that has four corners was exactly 444 weeks before the death of player number 44, the home run king, Hank Aaron, symbolic of the Antichrist king, 44th president, after he took the thing publicly to promote it 6 plus days earlier on the first day of the 117th Congress. And then 9 months and 11 days later, the 117th World Series was won by Atlanta, which is where he took the thing publicly. And he, of course, played his career with the Atlanta Braves. Player number 44 died on January 22nd, 2021. This is why the biggest thing sign is the death of player number 44. Player number 44 died, and again, the mass shootings are symbolic of the thing. So the Dark Knight Rises massacre was 444 weeks exactly before the death of player number 44. And I knew that date, the date that he died, I knew that date ahead of time, and I was expecting such a sign. And then player number 44 died. And I knew that date because of the 444 weeks connection. And then player number 44 died on that day. In other words, I predicted the death of Hank Aaron. If you have the eyes to see, if you have any faith into what is going on with this video channel, I predicted the death of Hank Aaron. Anyway, you don't have to believe that, whatever, but I'm predicting that Paul Simon will die, or at least fall and injure his head on October 31st. Now, player number 44 died on January 22nd, 2021, exactly 400.00 plus 400.00% of a year before the predicted return of the 44th president Antichrist to the White House that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms on 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue. That's amazing. That's amazing. I got to remember that. Hold on a second. I was correct. I hadn't documented that sufficiently in my notations in this sort of thing. This is huge. I'm just really, I guess it's sinking in right now. Look at that. From the inauguration, the first one of the 44th president, we connect to the movie massacre, which killed, lots of people, 70 actually. But anyway, that's 444 weeks to the death of the player number 44, which I predicted. And then it's another 44. It's 400 plus 44, 400 plus 400 exactly percent of a year before he's predicted to return to the White House, the 44th president. And of course, the White House is on 4 times 400 Pennsylvania Avenue and has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms. But that's from the death of player number 44, 400 plus 400% exactly. I obviously wrote this like 2 days ago, but I'm just really appreciating it right now. Wow. Now, on the 42nd anniversary of the release of Every Breath You Take, this is huge, right? Because 42 months is symbolic of the Antichrist. Every Breath You Take is symbolic of the Antichrist, the song itself by the Police. So 42 years is symbolic of that too. And so on the 42nd anniversary, this very important anniversary of the release of Every Breath You Take, one of the biggest songs in history, actor George Wendt died. Wendt's character on Cheers, the show, was known for having his funny one-liner jokes he would tell after entering the door of Cheers at the bottom of the stairwell, which is symbolic of hell. And in the book of Revelation, the door is opened with a key to the bottomless pit from which the demons arise, and Apollyon. So this is, in other words, this is huge, right? This is a huge epiphany that was had at the time. This guy, George Wendt, is Mr. Door. Like, he is Mr. Door. And God is using these door signs in his big picture of signs to symbolize what I just described. The door that opens to the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 9, symbolized by Revelation 9:11. Okay? So that's what this guy's known for, is walking through the door in every episode and then telling a one-liner joke before he sits down on the bar stool and drinks a beer. But it's a door at the bottom of the stairwell. And like Cheers is like a joke because it's like the opposite. It's the symbolic of hell. And the bar Cheers underground is like the pit. And this guy walks through the door every episode and tells a crass one-liner joke. The fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for door, which is why God is this is why this is so important in God's science. The number 4 is because the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the symbol for a door. Now, in Revelation, a door to the bottomless pit is opened with a key. The symbol of the Vatican is keys. On the day that the door actor, Mr. Door, on Cheers, died, the Pope exited the Vatican walls, as in he exited a door, to go to the outside the walls basilica. That's the name of the basilica, which is symbolic of the Apollyon through the door wall from the bottomless pit, because the Vatican is Mystery Babylon. And those that think America is Mystery Babylon and Bible prophecy, sorry, you're incorrect. It is Rome. It's very clear. Look at the passages again. It's clearly so many different ways beyond the dispute describing Rome and Catholicism and the Pope and the cardinals. Okay, let me not get into that. So anyway, the Pope goes out of the Vatican on this day, that the actor for Cheers died, and he's Mr. Door, going through the door at the bottom of the stairwell, the bottomless pit. And the Vatican walls is symbolic of this. The guy went basically out the door of the Vatican and into the outside the walls basilica. Okay. Now, Wendt died on the date May 20th, 2025. Exactly 44 months before the 44th president is predicted to return as the representative of Apollyon to the White House that has 44 plus 44 plus 44 rooms located on 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay, so it's Apollyon who rises from the bottomless pit in Bible prophecy after the door is opened, and Wendt, who is Mr. Door, died exactly, and door is symbolized by the number 4. He died exactly 44 months before the predicted return of the 44th president, who is Apollyon's representative. Apollyon is another word for Satan in the White House, which has 44 plus 44 plus 40 rooms and located on 4x400 Pennsylvania Avenue. Okay. Every breath you take is 4 minutes and 13 seconds long. 413 is the 130th semi-prime number, and the mark of the Antichrist is described in the book of Revelation chapter 13. In the Bible, the number 13 is symbolic of the Antichrist. P Diddy, Every Breath You Take sample, because of the song I'll Be Missing You, was sentenced to 4 years in jail, 4 months and 13 days, which since that's the song that is 4 minutes and 13 seconds long, Every Breath You Take, after the death of the actor who played Norm, Mr. Door, which equals 4. Okay. On that day that P. Diddy was sentenced to 4 years, Trumpet activated 40 plus 4 times 40, or 90 plus 110, which hints at Revelation 9:11, National Guard in Portland, which hints at portal, which is the same symbolism as a door, which equals 4, and the bottomless pit. Okay? So I forgot to mention this in the diagram. In other words, this is all about the number 4, because it was the day of the 4th boat that killed 4 people and the 4-year sentence of P. Diddy, right? And also on this day was 40 plus 4 times 40, or 90 plus 110, Guardsmen, National Guard in Portland, which is equal to 4, because of the symbolism of a door. This connected with 4 months and 13 days to the death of the actor who walked through the door, which is symbolized by 4, at the bottom of the stairwell, as in bottomless pit, and the door opening to hell, which connected with 42 years to the release of Every Breath You Take, which spent 4 plus 4 weeks at number 1. G500 in the Greek concordance is the word for Antichrist. Trumpet's second presidency is inadvertently laying down the groundwork for the Antichrist's persecution of God's people. Don't get me wrong, I support what he's doing, but what he's doing is unfortunate because it's a result of a people that no longer fear God. And it is the law of the universe that when a people no longer have God, they can't govern themselves, which is why all of the problems that Trump is trying to address. But what he's doing without realizing it is laying the groundwork for the opposite side of the team, the other team, to take control of what is happening. Because it was all Satan or God's plan, right? You bring in the 25 million, you create the chaos, you create the division about what to do about it. After the walls collapsed and trumpets were blown when the walls collapsed on Jericho, and Trump left office and the walls collapsed. And his presidency before that and election campaign before that was all about the border wall of security, as in the wall of security of Jericho collapsing. That collapses, it creates the chaos, and ultimately, as a result, to get rid of it is requiring unprecedented things in rounding them up, which is ultimately leading to a digital ID. And conservatives will go along with it because it's being done by a conservative president, but what's not realized is that it'll be used against them later. All right. And Antifa legitimately is domestic terrorism, but that'll also be used against conservatives and Christians, and the putting in of the National Guard into cities that don't go along with the plan, although it's legitimate and these cities are rotten and their leaders are evil and it's necessary. What will be done though later is it'll be used against conservatives in their cities when they refuse to take the mark and go along with the plan, etc. Okay? So Trump's second presidency is inadvertently laying down the groundwork of the Antichrist persecution of God's people, and Trump's inauguration, the beginning of all of this, on January 20th, 2025, was exactly 500 months after the release of Every Breath You Take. The producer of I'll Be Missing You, P Diddy, which uses the sample Every Breath You Take, was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months on the same day that the 42nd boat was seized 42 nautical miles from Gaza, which is symbolic of the bottomless pit and hell. And the breaking through the wall is symbolic of the rising from the bottomless pit through the door when they broke through on that day, October 7th. The 44th president in the White House, and they were, of course, demonically possessed, which is symbolic of the demons that will rise from the bottomless pit. The 44th president in the White House will watch every American's breath that they take, and his rule as the Antichrist is symbolized by 42 months. Hence these 42s here, and the sentencing for 4 years and 2 months. In Bible prophecy, the mark of the Antichrist is symbolized by the number 666. The Antichrist will promise immortality through the mark of the Antichrist, and this is symbolized by Genesis 3:22. Through the enforcement of the mark of the Antichrist will monitor people's every breath they take. Let me just back up. Genesis 3:22 is because the first lie ever told was by the serpent, Satan, in the garden to Eve, that she shall surely not die. This lie is the same lie that will be told at the end of the age. The first and the beginning and end of the age is the same lie, And it'll come through the mark of the Antichrist, this S-H-O-T, that will promise immortality and reversal of aging. And that's why in God's signs, he's using Genesis 3:22 to symbolize this. Now, through the enforcement of the mark of the Antichrist will monitor people's every breath they take. Every breath you take was released exactly the 66th triangular number of weeks before P Diddy was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months, which symbolizes or hints at 42 months period of the Antichrist. 66 is 3 times 22, as in Genesis 3:22, but also 666, the number of the Antichrist. The 66th triangular number of weeks hints at Genesis 3:22. 66 is the 11th triangular number. I'll Be Missing You spent 11 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard 100 chart. That's actually 2 sets of 11 there. Number 1 on the Billboard 100. But also, it spent 11 weeks, an astounding 11 weeks at number 1. That's more confirmation for the 66th triangular number of weeks between the release of Every Breath You Take and P. Diddy's sentence. The 66th triangular number of weeks is also 4,240% of a year. P. Diddy was sentenced to 4 years and 2 months. And his song won the Rap Song of the Year at the 40th Grammys. So 42 and 40 right there. And that's it, my friends. Hopefully you made it through this last part here about the real big, important reason God has used P. Diddy. If you didn't stick around, you missed it, because the reason for P. Diddy ultimately is his biggest song by far in history, Every Breath You Take. I'll Be Missing You, which was a big song because of the catchy riff from Every Breath You Take by the Police. But if you got all of this, so God is using all of this. God used P. Diddy to bring about this theme and symbolism of Every Breath You Take, pointing it to the Antichrist. One other thing that I forgot to mention, and so I'll, 1 second. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is that this 28 days from the sentencing of P. Diddy is because 2025 is 28 years after the release of the song that began his career, I'll Be Missing You, in 1997. 1997 plus 28 years gives us 2025. And so that's just the icing on the cake. That confirms the 28 days from the sentencing of P. Diddy to the death of Paul Simon. And Paul Simon is like P. Diddy in the sense that his big song, or rather his big hit that launched his career, is also extremely prophetic, Sound of Silence. So P. Diddy's first song, I'll Be Missing You, 28 years, and then the sentencing of P. Diddy, it is 28 days to the predicted fall of Paul Simon and his death from a head injury. I'll Be Missing You launched P. Diddy's career. It is his biggest hit. The song is extremely prophetic because of Every Breath You Take by the Police and Sting, as in Stingers. Likewise, Paul Simon's first hit that launched his career, Sound of Silence, is his biggest hit and is also extremely prophetic in God's signs. P. Diddy was sentenced in 2025, 28 years after the release of I'll Be Missing You. Paul Simon is predicted to fall and die 28 days after the sentencing of P. Diddy. Believe me, I know far better than you how the prediction made in this video was derived. And more importantly, I know far better than you why the righteous Christian God of the Bible has given me a voice through this prediction. If you are a quote-unquote Christian or Muslim, this prediction was not learned through a demon. Be warned that blaspheming the Holy Spirit is the unforgivable sin. If you are a New Ager or New Spirituality person, this prediction was not learned through somehow tapping into the supposed universal collective consciousness. If you are a conspiracy theorist, this prediction was not learned through figuring out a supposed code that the Illuminati and Satanists are using. This prediction was learned through the Bible and through watching carefully the Lord's prophetic signs, which Jesus commanded all Christians to do. Besides proving that Jesus Christ is the Lord, the reason why God has given me a voice through this prediction is to prove that the controversial things that I am saying in the videos on this channel are the truth. Therefore, a wise person will want to watch all of the videos on this channel. What I will also do is create a video or two that summarizes some of the controversial things that the Lord will prove to be true when the prediction being made in this video comes to pass. I will leave links to these must-watch videos in the description box below this video. Again, the purpose of this prediction, that is from God, is to prove these things that I will talk about. And therefore, it would be foolish to not watch the videos that I will leave links for in the description box below this video. Aliens and UFOs are demons masquerading as aliens and UFOs. Most people's spiritual experiences are demonic deception, especially if they are not a true follower of Christ. In the last days, many people who claim to be a follower of Christ will have spiritual experiences that are in reality demonic. God became a man and died a horrible death at the hand of the ruler of this world, Satan, and then defeated death for you, so that you too can overcome death, which is the price that must be paid for sin. It is time to repent, which means to change one's ways and turn to God and become a disciple of Jesus. Do not listen to or follow the example of most quote-unquote Christians. Instead, follow the teachings of Jesus, which most quote-unquote Christians ignore. Like Jesus, you must surrender your life. Put nothing ahead of Jesus, your Lord. Like Jesus, you must lay down your life so that you may live. As Jesus said, one must die first, like a kernel of wheat going into the ground, in order to then grow and produce fruit. And like Jesus said, one must produce fruit, or else like a branch or a tree not producing fruit, they will be thrown into the fire. Jesus was speaking to quote-unquote Christians when he said this. One must die the self in order to be born again. And like Jesus said, one must be born again to enter the kingdom. Like Jesus, you must sacrifice your life for the sake of the coming kingdom. It means to do work that involves some form of sacrifice and risk. To have faith does not mean to intellectually agree. You need to demonstrate your faith through taking action. To have faith means to trust in God's promises. Taking action demonstrates trust and fear of the Lord. The primary reason that the wrath of God is coming upon America is quote-unquote Christians that do not get what I have just explained. The only reason a Christian is alive is in order to help other people become Christians and make it to the kingdom. Do not be deceived by those on the political left claiming to be quote-unquote Christians. There is no such thing as a Christian on today's political progressive left. Jesus said, "Do not think I have come to abolish or change any bit of the law or the prophets of the Old Testament Bible." In other words, the God of the Old Testament Bible is the exact same God of the New Testament Bible. It is essential that you learn about the God of the Bible and his ways. The God of the Old Testament Bible is looking to see who will fear him, and to fear God is not the same thing as quote-unquote revering or honoring God. Through Christ's ransom payment, a Christian is someone who has been redeemed and freed from slavery to sin and Satan. In response, a true Christian recognizes that their life in this world does not belong to them, and they become a willing slave to Jesus for the sake of the kingdom. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. And don't only put the link to this video or another video on this channel in comments sections of places you typically visit, but importantly, put the link to the video in places you never visit, where people who don't think like you visit. If you are a quote-unquote Christian, nothing in terms of an evangelism tool compares to this video with its prediction. It is a massive bag of gold. Beware of Jesus' warning through the quote-unquote Christian that did nothing with his bag of gold and was banished to hell. Also, read Ezekiel chapter 3 and 33 for this same warning. If you think you might be spending too much time watching videos instead of working and sacrificing for the kingdom through handing out flyers and potentially helping hundreds of people in the same length of time as a video, my flyer is filled with amazing information that people need to know right now, and it points people to the video channel. Now is not the time to be handing out typical evangelical tracts that are largely based in error anyway, such as, quote, Jesus loves you, unquote, for example. You can hand out the flyer on busy street corners, put them on car windshields in busy parking lots, and put them in mailboxes. Just send the file to your local print shop. You can download the file from the website. Please leave a like and upvote the video, and once this prediction has come to pass, share this video with everyone you know, and more, don't stop sharing it everywhere in social media. It is essential that everyone immediately read the homepage of my website, asteroidprediction.com. If you are watching this on the YouTube platform, please note that not all of the videos are on YouTube. You need to switch to the Odyssey.com or Rumble.com channel, and do it now in case you aren't able to later.